Michael Tracy, the guy who thinks Israel has nothing to do with the Iran war, and he thinks that Jeffrey Epstein was railroaded by the United States justice system.
Do you recall Trump in 2024 bragging that he's the most pro-Israel president of all time?
Yeah. Is it not relevant that Netanyahu flew to Mar-a-Lago over Christmas? Then all of a sudden, the Iran crisis started right then and there. I think the Epstein stuff is relevant.
Kurt, you're speculating that Epstein might be associated with this?
Yes. That's not what
negotiation. Just when he negotiates by declaring a 60-day.
When you vote third party, it implies agnosticism about who wins the election. That you think both sides are just as bad.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so I find that annoying.
What does J.D. Vance do, like a little sycophant that he is? He goes to the cabinet meeting last week with Trump, which is like, Kim Jong-un basically requiring everybody to kiss his ass. And J.D. Vance has no problem with that. You're most concerned about Israel. You're better off with the Democratic coalition at this point. Joe Rogan had Donald Trump, basically the eve of the presidential election, in his studio for 3 hours. He could have asked him about Iran. It was an ass-kiss fest. Dave Smith, I'm not crediting Dave Smith for anything anymore, but amazingly, I don't think I've heard him say a single thing that's funny. He says it would be justifiable for me to be murdered because he doesn't like my views on the Jeffrey Epstein story.
All right, welcome everyone to the podcast here today. I'm glad to be joined by Kurt Mills, Executive Director of the American Conservative, and Michael Tracy, independent journalist on Substack, and now collaborating with Matt Taibbi on his Substack. They're doing a lot of podcasts together, which is cool.
One-time contributor to the American Conservative as well. Don't forget that. In a different era, though, politically.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks both of you for joining.
No problem.
I'll just preface this by saying, Michael, I've been following your work over the years, and I really respect your ability to punch both sides. And Michael, I will say you have a very unusual, philosophy on these things of like you're just willing to just call out anyone, including like friends or like people who've had you on their shows, or like most people don't go that far. Most people are like, okay, I've been on this guy's podcast, let's, but you just kind of go for everyone, which is a very interesting approach. I guess it probably leads to like less big podcast invites, but it is interesting to see that you're just going to call whatever you see.
I never thought to myself, gee, I should go around courting podcast invites. I think I'd rather jump off a bridge than do that. But yeah, you're right. The media is basically like a big high school clique where now like being invited to sit at the lunch table is akin to being invited on some dopey podcast. And I guess I never made a deliberate choice to forego that whole perverse social dynamic, but I think you're right in observing that seems to be very commonplace on the internet. In fact, Sam Harris tried to do that thing with me as though I was going to be really offended that I hadn't been invited on his podcast to talk about the Epstein case, and that made me unserious. And I have to go nibble on my turkey sandwich in the corner. So it's a totally corrosive dynamic, I think, and it's gotten even worse because everybody and their mother has a podcast. Of course, I think we should just abolish all podcasts, frankly.
Yeah, well, the Sam Harris thing I was actually going to mention briefly, but for example, like you've been platformed by Tucker in the past on Fox News. And, he's had on people like yourself and Glenn Greenwald and Lee Fong and all these people. You have decided to, criticize Tucker very aggressively as opposed to maintain like a level of friendliness that you guys seem to have with you going on his show and obviously getting a wide exposure to his audience. I always liked him personally. I always got along well with him. I appreciated being given the opportunity to go on his top-rated primetime cable news show when he still had that at Fox. Frankly, I kind of yearned for the days where he had a bit more, let's say, guardrails, which, for better or worse, existed in some form on Fox. But the whole trajectory he's had in the past couple years, I've definitely been highly wary of. But I'm not a total socially, R-word. So I try to maintain some comity with people within reason. But then when he started obfuscating the Iran war origins on behalf of Donald Trump, whom he still professes to, quote, love so much and feel this personal allegiance to,
then I thought it became untenable to withhold public interest or criticisms that are squarely in the public interest just out of some misguided notion of social propriety. But I would still chat friendly with him today if he were willing to. I'm not sure if he would, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah, and Kurt, I hope you don't mind, just for a couple minutes. Actually, I wanted to ask Michael about this before we jump into the debate. But so like Michael, like would some people they're more of the mindset of like, and I don't know what the extent of your.
I'm sort of curious what Kurt's philosophy is on this.
Yeah. But before we get to that, like some people, and I don't know if you would say you were friends with Tucker or you had personal communication, but a lot of people when they disagree with others in public, they feel like the social ethic is to then reach out privately and tell them like, hey, I don't agree with this before. I don't know what your stance on.
I mean, I did that over the summer when he had on this Daryl Cooper character for 3 hours to ramble about Epstein, and virtually every sentence that came out of this guy's mouth just contained blatant falsehoods that were stoking up this ridiculous frenzy. And the video or the podcast got millions upon millions of views, and I was being beckoned to address Daryl Cooper as though he was going to prove me decisively wrong about Epstein, because I take a little bit more of a contrary perspective, let's say, on that whole story. And I finally sit down and do it, and it was just a total journalistic disservice for Tucker to not just platform him. I don't care about platforming anybody per se. It was just the unwarranted authority that was ascribed to this guy as the internet's leading Epstein expert, supposedly, when he was just totally ridiculous. I mean, and not just ridiculous factually, which he was, and like, making up quotes from a federal judge, for instance, but also that he was being imbued with this journalistic authority of sorts by way of Tucker, and then given access to this giant audience. And, Tucker was, we're on good enough terms where he seemed like initially amenable to my queries, but then it just kind of ran up against a brick wall, because I think, unfortunately, and I say that sincerely because I genuinely like Tucker, unfortunately, he's been in this epistemic freefall where, it's just Israel, Epstein, pedophiles, Pizzagate, blah, 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 blinking over and over again. And he just like follows the rabbit, and you can't really rein him in. So like the engagement that I attempted with him did not really bear much fruit. But yeah, I mean, I think it's good practice if you know somebody on a personal level to, not just like capriciously go around denouncing them in public if like there may be something that you could sort out privately. But I also think that journalists in particular have an obligation to identify when there's a matter of public concern, and that if addressing the public concern is something that they deem to be in the public interest, then they are obliged to do so within reason. So we're not just influencers, we're not content creators, we're not failed comedians who have a podcast. There should be, anyway, ideally, an extra layer of public spirited obligation that I think is attended to journalists that sometimes, yes, does have to supplant the cordialities of just interpersonal dynamics, especially with a person like Tucker who has huge political influence. He's not just like my friend from high school. I mean, I have like 5 or so friends who I wouldn't do that to, most of whom are going to be like from high school or, from like a personal. I didn't meet Tucker through Little League baseball practice. I met him through a political media arrangement.
Yeah. So you mentioned all the Epstein stuff, which I still don't really have a strong opinion on that. Like I've seen your commentary. I've seen, your friend Glenn Greenwald, he disagrees with you on this as well. And there's Whitney Webb's on one end, and then there's other people, all kinds of takes. So I don't really have an informed view on that yet. But one last thing I'll just say before we get to the debate, the Sam Harris thing that you mentioned, Michael. So Sam, I actually saw that podcast with Coleman. So he basically, if I remember correctly, like he insinuated that there might be some ulterior motive to why you're covering Epstein the way you are.
I gave him enough of a benefit of the doubt when I heard that I thought he was somehow trying to intimate that he assumed that I was pro-Trump, or that I was anti-Trump in the first term, maybe when he became aware of me. And therefore I was taking this perspective on the Epstein issue solely to just exonerate Trump for some kind of crude political reason. But then, I guess I should have been a little bit more cynical, because lots of people then informed me that what he probably meant that is I'm actually personally a pedophile or have personal sexual depravities that I'm just like projecting. So I'm a pedophile secretly, but I decided to get really involved in the Epstein story of all stories, to keep the heat off me. So I don't know. Sam Harris is esteemed for his impeccable logic, but I'm not sure that really adds up, which is why he didn't spell out what his qualm was against me. He just kind of alluded to something. Anyway, I'd like to. I'm sort of curious about before we get to the meat of the debate. Kurt's take on like this podcast social dynamic.
Yeah, but I will just say on the Sam piece, it is interesting. I would like him to spell out what exactly he meant there because I was confused. But I will say, Michael,
I'll give a 2-hour lecture on it. I'm sure.
Michael, you and Sam would actually agree on podcasts. Sam, like Sam goes on and on about.
Yeah, I know his view.
Podcast. So you guys are.
I read The End of Faith when I was like 18, so I'm very much familiar with Sam Harris. Yes.
You're a fan of his other stuff?
I'm not really a fan of much, but I read it.
Okay. But you guys are in 100% agreement. I just want to point that out on the independent media stuff. So that is interesting.
Well, I'm not sure if we are really, because he just then did the very thing that he denounced by like doing these speculative innuendos that he castigated podcasters for being so eager to do. So I'm not sure we really would agree.
All right, Kurt, thanks for being patient there. I think Michael is curious about your stance on any of this before we get into the topics of the debate.
What is the question?
Michael, what are you curious about?
I just like the social dynamics of journalism where like you don't want to offend anybody's sensibilities because you want to get an invite on their podcast or you want to maintain these relationships or something, and therefore you kind of squelch stuff that you might otherwise be inclined to say that has like some public interest.
I'm not offended by the way that you roll. I think it would be different if you were like evangelizing it and saying that people who have different strategies or tactics are immoral or something like that. And then I think the thing that really does bother me, and I won't name people, but people who have a persona like on screen or on television or on Twitter or whatever, on X, and then pretend like, oh, it's just a game behind, So I just think lying is bad, and that's kind of my I'm sure within my world I'm considered highly disagreeable, but compared to Michael Tracy, I'm not. So
you're an angel.
Yeah, I mean, so I
look.
Don't,
I mean, I admit I have an unusual temperament. So
no, it's fine. I don't really get what the. I mean, I can't imagine anyone honestly wouldn't have Michael on because of the way Michael rolls,
I feel like there's people that wouldn't have him on at this point. I don't know if you want to name names, but I mean, some of the people, Michael, you've criticized, I don't know if they would.
I would imagine Tucker probably would not at this point, which is fine. Like, that's his prerogative. Again, I'm not jockeying to get on any particular podcast. I know that's what people seem to do a lot these days, but I don't. Like, I have enough to do day to day that I'm not like fishing for some podcast invite. But anyway, I just think there's a lot of sort of subtle corruptions in the current media environment that aren't like well theorized enough. But anyway,
anything else?
And actually, it sort of plays into the theme we're going to be discussing more. Substance.
Anything else you want to say on this, Kurt? Before we
maybe it would be better to just discuss the subject. Then.
Yeah, let's get into this. Let's dive in.
Between our spirits will be flushed out and obvious.
Yeah. Okay. So we got into some other stuff there, but I did want to say both you guys. So the topics of debate today are, first of all, what role Israel has, if any, in Trump deciding to wage war against Iran, and then second part of the debate is MAGA really anti-war or anti-interventionalist? And you guys both, I've enjoyed your commentary and learned a lot. And it appears you guys disagree on these questions, but I'm curious to see how much you would disagree, if at all.
Debate.
Pardon?
Is this a debate? Formal opening statements?
No. I always do more like conversational debates.
I'll give an opening statement if you'd like. I'll stand on my podium.
You're not Max Abrams, so I'll allow it.
Max Abrams, that's a piece of work. He hasn't spoken to me since October. He hasn't spoken to me since October 7th.
He's bad faith.
We got along. Interestingly, I mean, he's another guy. I mean, we got along reasonably well. I mean, I wasn't really friends with him, but then he decided that I was like persona non grata because I thought some of the anti-Semitism hysteria was kind of overstated after October 7th, but that was enough to get me banished.
So, okay. So before we get into it, so just my sense of both you guys. Kurt, you've been very much criticizing Israel and their role in American politics and this decision that Trump made to wage war. And then Michael, it's interesting how you've just morphed in the independent media landscape in like kind of like like not substantively, but just the issues that you like. There's a limited amount of time in the day. You can only focus on so many issues, and it's interesting, like some of the issues that you focus on, that then makes people think of you in a certain way versus when you were talking about other issues. But lately, you've been very critical of people attributing, I think, in your view, excessive weight on Israel's influence in recent political decisions.
Yeah. So you want me to just explain? And I'll give like a
Sure.
a minute of an explanation. Okay, so number one, I have been critical from the moment that I entered the public arena, let's say, in a media or journalistic capacity, of the influence of Israel on U.S. foreign policy, and how there used to be anyway a taboo against honestly appraising that. But now there's been a strange overcorrection where this sort of like metaphysical primacy is constantly attributed to Israel that plays a convenient political role, or has a convenient political function for certain people who, I would argue, presented a funhouse mirror version of Trump as aligned with their proclivities on, say, non-interventionism or realism or whatever synonym you want to use, that culminated with the 2024 election, where the podcast audiences, anti-establishment podcast audiences, thought that they were voting for somebody who was going to storm into office with an Avengers squad of RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Rogan and Elon Musk and defeat the deep state, release the Epstein files, and end the wars. That was just a nonsense cartoon that was effective propaganda.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it was effective propaganda. I've always acknowledged that. And Kamala Harris certainly couldn't match it. But it was just totally inane and totally divorced from Trump's record, his rhetoric, his personnel, and what could be deciphered of his ideology. So I sort of bemoan it from that perspective. So what you have people of that inclination now doing, it's like a Tuckerology thing, or the Tucker two-step, where Tucker doesn't like the war with Iran for understandable reasons, but he's insistent, he's adamant that the war was fundamentally engineered or orchestrated by Israel, and Donald Trump, yet again, in year 11 of him being the most dominant national political figure, is constantly being led astray by all these devious, conniving, manipulating influences that always somehow end up convincing him to depart from his true, pure-hearted instincts, which I guess are supposed to be antithetical to, quote, neocons, whatever we mean by that, in 2026, or some such variation of this argument. Because if Tucker had to acknowledge what I maintain is the case, that this war with Iran flows ineluctably from Trump's very clearly articulated second-term ideology around global conquest, around resource extraction, around his own personal megalomania, and is very much understandable or interpretable from that standpoint, then Tucker and people of that ilk would have to sort of acknowledge that they participated in peddling a totally fantastical and nonsensical image of Trump in 2024, when Tucker, for instance, decided to formally endorse him, go around campaigning with him, deliver speeches at the Republican convention and on the campaign trail, and tell the voters, or the voters that he had a connection to, that Trump represented or was a harbinger of something radically different than he ended up being. And that should have been clear at the time, because I was pointing it out contemporaneously. So I think there's sort of some political chicanery going on right now with the monomaniacal, myopic overemphasis on Israel as somehow the prime mover of this Iran war. That's not to say that Israel is not an adjunct to Trump in waging the war, or that Netanyahu himself hasn't been committed for decades to the objective of overthrowing the Iranian government. But there's almost like this weird fatalism that's being promoted now among this Tucker sort of cohort. And, I have to say, kind of includes the American conservative to some degree, where oh, the Israel lobby is just so all powerful, insurmountable that Trump was just no match for them. He's been subjugated by Israel. I saw Kurt say that recently. Subjugated by Israel. Because it's much less comfortable to acknowledge that Trump barreled into office in 2025 outlining a very clear and constantly repeated ideology around this global conquest harebrained scheme he's got going on where, Venezuela to Iran, now to Cuba. We had the Greenland thing. He declared himself the ruler of Venezuela, the ruler of Gaza, taking over the Panama Canal. Who knows what'll cook up next? It's much more comfortable to instead displace all blame, or the vast majority of blame or agency or responsibility, onto this nefarious interloper of Israel rather than reckon honestly with Donald Trump. Because a lot of people have been invested in Trump or portraying a certain image of Trump that I just think is not supportable by the facts and evidence, and hasn't been for a long time, but now is almost outrageously non-tenable.
All right, there was a lot there. You blended the first and second topics of the debate and just kind of hit both there. Kurt, do you want to start tackling that? Like, the first item was Israel's influence in Trump deciding to wage war in Iran. So I do want to kind of go through this systematically, but do you want to get started there, Kurt? And if you want to address the other stuff too about Trump ran on, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to the extent that I understand Michael's perspective in following the work, which I think is probably pretty closely, though maybe not as closely as everybody. I think the word overcorrection is interesting, which is, I think Michael has a talent for spotting hypocrisies and contradictions that are real and potentially exploding them, right? So if all you were doing were reading Michael's work, you would think that Israel had no impact on foreign policy, and you would think that Jeffrey Epstein was just a guy, right? And I think, Michael, basically, you don't support the war, correct? Right?
Of course
not. Yeah. Well, but again, a lot
of course I don't support it. That is.
Yeah. Just I'm trying to make this friendly. I'm not actually.
Yeah.
Like, you don't support.
I don't think anything personally. So go at me hard if you want.
Somebody who didn't know, I've known you very loosely for about 10 years. Like somebody who just came up to your work like this year might actually be confused that you don't support the war in Iran, right? Because like the
that's fair. That's fair.
No, I think like like a super majority of your public commentary is just very critical of the right-wing critics of the war. Now, that's not to say that like you're not allowed to do that. It's just like the emphasis, I think, is kind of curious. I actually don't really know at this point what you think of Epstein, but I assume you don't think he's a totally benign, random guy who lucked into having the world's greatest Rolodex, right? I mean, you assume he has some kind of connections to intelligence, some kind of inappropriate sex scheme, right? I mean, he was convicted of it. His paramour and accomplice was also convicted of it, right? And so, but if you just read, most of what you write, you would think that like this is just an enormous miscarriage of justice that this guy is getting blamed for all this stuff. And so, I realize what I'm saying at a certain point is like a defense of, just because it's directionally true, that everything, any kind of abuse of the truth or any kind of gliding over the facts can be excused. I'm not saying that, but I do think it's an interesting kind of overcorrection to what you perceive as an overcorrection. Because I assume, you are a kind of left-wing anti-war journalist, right? And like these are, pro-war facets of oligarchy. And so I think it's a strange kind of focus as far as I'm concerned.
I think the focus to me is totally rational because there are fatally flawed perceptions being promoted from the online media ecosystem, which I partially inhabit, that are putting out, I think, a wholly inaccurate picture of how it is that the United States decided on February 28th, 2026, to go to war with Iran. And I don't know how anybody could be seriously confused about my stance on the war.
How would you describe that? And like, try to be fair to be fair to your opponent. How would you describe the sort of media and Tuckerverse, like let's not do Candace Owens, let's not do Ian Carroll, what is the median Tucker acolyte think happen?
I mean, we could just stick with Tucker himself, but yeah, I think Tucker is very influential, so people tend to echo the stuff he puts out.
What do you think? What do we?
Yeah, say? I think Trump was manipulated or induced or cajoled or pressured, or some will even say blackmailed. That's alluded to.
And you deny all of this. You don't think it had any?
I think it's being wildly overstated as a proximate cause of the war in order to displace agency away from Trump, who's the commander in chief, onto Israel.
But so again, I don't want to make this a boring conversation. I have said publicly that Trump is to blame. I mean, so like I have, and I don't think my commentary has been easy on Trump, but like I think it's sort of setting up this false test where like if I don't 100% blame Trump, if the Tucker coalition doesn't 100% blame Trump, what Tucker's doing publicly is his own thing. We can get into that, but I'm not Tucker, so I prefer to just discuss the issues. Sure. I think that Israel set the table and Donald Trump ate the meal. And so I think the conditions of this are 50% on the lobby. You would agree that the Israel lobby exists, right? I mean, do you think that Mearsheimer and Walsh, this is okay? Yeah, but
I don't totally agree with their thesis, but I think I think they made a valuable. I mean, I first read their book in like 2007.
Yeah. So you think it's a fair piece of scholarship, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like, and again, someone might be confused, and again, not trying to make it over personalized, that like, a lot of your fellow travelers in sort of attacking Tucker, attacking, the anti-war right, et cetera, actually don't think the Israel lobby is a fair piece of scholarship, right? They think they think there's nothing to it. I mean, you're very sui generis, and I would just submit that your focus is interesting. We're talking about it. I'm talking about it, but I think it's kind of myopic.
I don't think it's myopic because I am arguing, or the argument that I'm increasingly making and increasingly convinced is true, is that the 2024 election was a pinnacle of American propaganda because it innovated ways to rope in the online media ecosystem, which at that point was burgeoning and perhaps even superseding the traditional media in influence. And we have people like Tucker at the forefront of it, and have all these podcast guys who are much more influential than, I don't know, Caitlin Collins at CNN or something, putting out this blinkered version of Trump as this deep state Avenger Squad leader who's going to end all the wars. And my issue is that I think needs to be reckoned with, not because I have like a niche or weird sort of fixation on it, but because we want to understand how this war came about in the most accurate way possible, right? And if your understanding is that you voted for Trump or you listened to these podcasters and supported Trump in 2024 on anti-war grounds, and you're just totally flummoxed by how he could have ratcheted up the bellicosity against Iran, my point is you must have just either not known about or ignored or decided to buy into this ludicrous spin of his record from the first term, and then projected some false understanding of Trump onto him by 2024. So in the annals of American war propaganda, I do think that is something that needs to be dissected. Now, I'm interested in the war itself. I've commented, I could pull up a million tweets and Substack excerpts and podcasts that I've been on where I'm just straightforwardly critical of the war on its own terms without even any reference to these more meta discursive issues. But I think one reason maybe I focus a little bit more on this meta discursive issues is because nobody does. I was going crazy in 2024 trying to point out how an eventuality like this was eminently foreseeable, and it was totally penalized by the algorithm in a way I think spoke to the potency of that propaganda that was going on in 2024.
Yeah, 2024 was a weird year. I think you're implying something more like a conspiracy or
no conspiracy, just effective propaganda.
Media cynicism or something like this.
Groupthink, confirmation bias, audience capture, a whole host of different dynamics that I think congealed into creating this false perception.
100% chance we're roughly thereabouts of an Iran war in 2024.
I thought there was 100% chance, and I said so at the time, that if you were voting for Trump on the assumption that you were voting for a policy of reduced bellicosity against Iran, that you were in La La Land.
Okay.
You said this at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
But I also pointed out how he would, he also gave just outright speeches and statements where he was threatening to blow the whole of Iran to smithereens, where he was preemptively endorsing the idea of a joint U.S.-Israeli air strike campaign against Iranian nuclear facilities. And, I guess I could have just, started to kiss Steve Witkoff for the first 6 months of the second Trump administration, and pretended that something was going on that plainly wasn't. But yeah, I mean, I do find it to be maddening in a way that I think warrants some extra journalistic focus, in addition to the coverage and the commentary and the research that I have also done on the war itself. Because I'm a student of American propaganda. I compared Trump to Richard Nixon in 1968, where Richard Nixon in 1968 said, and Peter Hitchens shared this at the time, so I was trying to make the argument that in a way that was amenable to conservatives. Richard Nixon in 1968. I know you're a Nixon guy, right? Because both from Orange County, is that right?
I like me some Nixon. Yeah,
I like him too. I think he's a fascinating figure. I've listened to hours upon hours of those interviews he did with Frank Gannon, his former aide in the early '80s. And he's very learned, very, very definitely intelligent, definitely very well informed.
With a brain.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm into him as a historical figure.
Yeah.
But Richard Nixon in 1968 said that he had a secret plan to solve the Vietnam War, or peace with honor. And Trump likewise always had a secret plan to solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours. He had a secret plan to bring peace to the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he never got pressed on it for specifics when he did all these dopey podcasts that were part of this consensus that unified behind him.
Yeah, Kurt, before you respond, I know we're adding a lot of things here, but we're going to go through some specifics that I think need to be drilled down on. But just so people watching this or listening to this know, we're going to go through some of this methodically. But Kurt, I'll let you respond first, and then
by the way,
go back to
remind me to address the Epstein point as well, because that was sort of a strange characterization.
Okay,
go ahead,
Kurt. I feel like you wanted to respond, and then we can circle back to some of the Israel stuff in a second. We'll get to it.
Well, no, I mean, I think that history was far more fluid and contingent than Michael's implying. So, I mean, the administration opened up negotiations with the Iranians. The Biden administration didn't do that. Trump didn't negotiate directly with the Iranians in term one. I think these were all real things that happened. I think there was and is an impression within the administration that the anti-war right, the podcast right, is a real thing, is a real constituency that they don't want to lose. They leaned on it for their campaign. I think it is potentially moderating elements of the conduct of the war right now. And I think Trump is a coalition manager. I think he's chosen poorly. And I think this war is a disgrace. But fundamentally, this is not somebody who is up there like George W. Bush, who has like a firm conviction in any of this. And I think he is at some level self-evidently venal, and he's in the pocket of the Israel lobby and potentially more. He could be intimidated. And, I don't think the Epstein thing is the secret to the universe, but I think there's something there. And I think it's strange that the timeline lines up exactly with the ramp up of the war last summer. And
what's the causation there?
How does
that correlate?
I don't know, because we don't have all the information because the government's not releasing it. And so, which is why it's strange. I mean, again, I'm not arguing that you are arguing that the government shouldn't release all the information. I assume you think the government should release all the information, right?
I criticized Thomas Massie when he introduced his legislation with Ro Khanna because they decided to include these giant carve-outs that I said months before the Epstein Files Transparency Act was passed would result in these superfluous redactions. So yes, I'm in favor of maximum transparency.
Only Massie and Khanna are doing anything. So I mean, it's this sort of
randomly slandering a bunch of an auto mechanic and an IT manager in New York City as complicit in child sex crimes, and then not even having the decency to apologize to them. Well, that is something that they've been doing.
Okay. I think though, I think your criticism is perfectionist, fundamentally, and overly tailored.
Explain.
Would you prefer that Khanna and Massey didn't do any kind of activism on the Epstein story? Because I mean, most of Congress is pliant and
That's a good question.
anonymous. Like you take a lot of swings at people that are ostensibly more or less aligned with you, and you currently, I don't think it will be permanent because I think you're pretty you evolve in your alliances, but you currently are allied of a lot of people who I think you actually don't even agree with that much.
I don't consider myself really in alliance with anyone. I'm not sure who you're referring to. You mean like the quote neocons or Ben Shapiro or something? I don't consider myself to be in any sort of alliance with those people, just because incidentally we might have a similar perspective on something that, yeah, in the case of Ben Shapiro or Batya or these other people, is informed by their pro-Israel underlying convictions, but that's not what it's informed by. For me, I just got done telling you that Max Abrams decided to denounce me as somebody who was like an anti-Semitic something or other.
I'm not arguing like, Sith Lord, you got to pick a side whole thing. I think that would be very on you. But again, like if someone was just reading your stuff the last 6 months, they would think Michael Tracy, he is the guy who thinks Israel has nothing to do with the Iran war, and he thinks that Jeffrey Epstein was basically, was railroaded by the United States justice system.
I mean, they couldn't have been reading that closely then, because I'll give you an article that I published last. Well, I mean, then what am I supposed to do about that if people don't actually read? They just assume that I'm saying things that I'm not.
Your focus is.
I'll say it here. Look,
weirdly weighted.
Here's what I wrote in my article on March 18th, I think it was. March 12th. I am obviously not denying that Israel is a significant factor in precipitating this war or in U.S. foreign policy in general. It is obviously true that Trump is waging the war in concert with Netanyahu. It is obviously true that toppling the government of Iran has been a decades-long goal of Netanyahu and other Israeli political and military officials. Nobody's denying that, or at least I'm not. But promoting Israel as the mythical be-all, end-all explanation only serves to speciously immunize Trump, and therefore his erstwhile propaganda function is sadly like Tucker.
I think you're fighting a straw man. It's not the end-all, be-all. It is
the prime mover, the main agent of responsibility.
It's the first mover.
Okay, so explain how Israel should be understood as the primary agent of responsibility here.
You're twisting my words. They're not.
Okay, then tell me what your contention is.
The responsibility is shared. Israel wanted this. The President of the United States acceded to it. So it's joint culpability as far as I'm concerned. But
Trump didn't want it. Trump did it despite his best instincts.
We would be doing this without Israel, which is an almost impossible counterfactual, I think is worth pursuing. I don't think Trump has a particular axe to grind with the Iranians.
Really? Doesn't he go around claiming that they were trying to assassinate him? You don't think he has an axe to grind?
That is actually...
He said that was one of his motivations for launching the war, that they got to the supreme leader before they got to him.
I think the historical record there is actually a little murky. There's differing accounts on the campaign, for instance. Say what you will. I think he's actually a reasonable journalist. Michael Wolff, in his book, has a number of accounts where he says that Trump would try to encourage Senate candidates who would particularly want Tim Sheehy, who would frequently campaign, being like, "Remember we liquidated Soleimani, et cetera, et cetera." He would encourage Soleimani not to do that. Sorry, Tim Sheehy not to do that, as so not to provoke Iranian assassination squads, these kinds of things. I think it's unclear, and I think this is something that Tucker has actually been very useful for the public record on. It's unclear to the degree to which Trump historically has believed in these Iranian assassinations.
Well, he says he believes it.
He says he does now. Like, I mean, what has happened is that Trump has increasingly adopted neocon rhetoric, which is provided for him. Now, does that mean he has no responsibility? No. But does it also mean that the people that are writing the talking points, that are backing him up on this, that are his new kitchen cabinet, are irrelevant? Also, no. I mean, like he is not a ideological neocon. He is not George W. Bush. He never ran as one. Maybe he ran as nothing. Maybe he ran as all things to all men. That's potentially a more interesting thesis.
Well, he did run as somebody.
Let Kurt finish, and then you can go.
The idea that he has run as an unreconstructed, actually the people in 2016 who led the Never Trump movement against me, that's true MAGA. Actually, I am the sole arbiter of what MAGA is. So like that's something he never said on the campaign trail, right? Like, hey, you Muslim cleric who's voting for me in Michigan, actually I control what MAGA is if you vote for me. It's not what he did. Now you can say he's a jackass, he's a cynic, he's a psychopath, but he politics insofar as that approach went. And I do think it's relevant. And I do think that if you would run the simulation a number of times, I'm not sure it would go like this. I think the fundamental thing that happened is the lobby's very powerful. The Republican establishment loves this. Seemingly, the members of Congress would rather the Iran war keep going than keep their seats. You know, I mean, this is bad for them in the midterms. You would think they would be lobbying for the war to stop. There is some reporting that they're doing that in private, but in public, basically, no one is opposed to it on the Hill on the Republican side. And you know, I think the idea that he always was this iteration of himself, talking like Mark Levin, telling people to watch Mark Thiessen, I think is a bit of a retcon of history.
I don't know. I remember Mark Levin being invited to Hanukkah celebrations at the White House in the first time.
It was always in a coalition. So like, for my own perspective, I always knew this was a risk. And you can say I got the trade wrong, and the Iran war is kind of like my Rubicon, third rail, can't crush it. You can't. I mean, so that's. I'm the guy who went on Tucker the night of Soleimani's assassination and denounced it. Very presumably, the president of the United States watched that. You know, I am incandescent and unbelievably disappointed by this. But the idea that it was a known that this was going to happen like this, you must be operating with more information than me.
Maybe so. I mean, I just think that there should be more introspection and self-criticism as to how something like this could have come as such a shock, apparently, or even come as something that was like a downside risk or like sort of almost like a negligible outcome that didn't need to be emphasized in real time.
I think
because I don't know. Do you recall Trump in 2024 being bashful about bragging that he was the most pro-Israel president of all time and that he was going to ratchet it up even further in a second term?
Yeah.
Even as he was going around to Dearborn, Michigan, and throwing a bone to some imams who like didn't really have a great grasp of the issue.
He also accused Joe Biden of being Genocide Joe. You know, I mean, I think
he's just like repeating a funny thing that somebody chanted. In terms of anything that could be, everything that could be discerned about his policy record. Okay, let's go to this. So when Trump wins the 2024 election, right, he's got maximum political capital. If we look at the entire scope of his time as a national political figure, when he wins the 2024 elections, when he has the most political capital, I think that's fair to say. Because he wins the popular vote, he wins all the swing states, as he likes to remind us. There's no issue of a electoral college, snafu as in 2016.
Yep.
And so he starts to choose personnel for his second administration. Who does he choose as his Secretary of State, who's now got this hybrid Henry Kissinger role and is probably more influential than anybody to occupy a similar position since Kissinger? He picks Marco Rubio, who's long known to have been one of the most ardent anti-Iran hawks and just hawks in general in the United States Senate, as the person that he perceives as best suited to carry out his foreign policy goals. He picks Mike Waltz as his national security advisor initially, which is not even subject to Senate confirmation, so he could have picked Fred Flintstone if he wanted to, as somebody who he wants in the White House constantly, helping him to organize his foreign policy portfolio.
The transition was disappointing. But that's
what does that reflect about Trump? Like, did Israel swindle him into making those picks? Like, how far back does this go? A lot of people love to talk about this quote from Rubio the week after the war, where the idea was that something like Israel was going to strike first, so therefore the United States got dragged in and had to go to war because Israel was going to be instigating it. Well, I don't know. Excuse me. Did Netanyahu somehow bamboozle Trump into amassing the largest U.S. military presence in the Middle East since 2003 ahead of that, like, timing, window of timing? And I don't know, did anybody see the reporting in Politico and elsewhere where they were coordinating amongst themselves, the U.S. and Israelis, about like who should go first, what would be the most politically palatable? Was Israel ghostwriting Truth Social in January, where Trump was calling for Iranians to take over every government institution and saying, I'll be right there to help you. Like, how far does this influence go? Where, yeah, of course, the pro-Israel lobby is in the ambiance in Washington, D.C. Nobody's denying that. But again, in order to get Trump off the hook, still to this day, on some level, people talk about it as though it's just this behemoth and insurmountable, as though Obama didn't pursue the Iran nuclear deal over the bitter objections of the, quote, Israel lobby and defeated them in his second term.
You are positing two things at once, and then weirdly downgrading one of them. You can see that an Israel lobby exists, and you can see that it's highly influential. Okay. Just for the record, because it's not a point of emphasis as far as I can tell in your recent journalism. Secondarily, you are
I've emphasized it a lot actually over the years,
but not recently. In my view, secondarily, you are saying that Trump has this clear ideology that is overwhelmingly hawkish, imperial, ziophilic, Iran hawkish. This is actually who he is. This is what he believes. He cares about it. He's willing to use political capital on it. And it is just entirely happening independent of this very powerful lobby that you can see that exists.
In conjunction with, in synergy with, I would say.
Well, certainly in synergy with, yeah. But like you think that Donald Trump, who was kind of about him, who's kind of about being popular, who's kind of about self-enrichment, who's kind of about being
not liking Iran. I mean, he's made that pretty clear since he came down the escalator.
Yeah. You are arguing that he is taking it in the teeth, taking it on the chin, letting gas prices go above $4 a gallon, letting oil go above 120, letting his earliest supporters in media denounce him or not denounce him enough for your skin. And he's doing this out of conviction?
I think it largely is conviction driven, just like I thought that Joe Biden's policy in Ukraine was largely conviction driven, because he was the guy that Bill Clinton delegated to run the NATO expansion in the 1990s. And there was a lot that could be traced back to Biden as
Joe Biden.
I know, but like Donald Trump's, he'd been in 2016, I would have been more hesitant to ascribe Trump with any kind of clear-cut ideological motivations. But then once we got 4 years of data from the first term, and then 4 years of him being the kingmaker in the Republican Party during the interregnum period, and then the rhetoric on the campaign trail, the personnel, the influences, there does become an ideology that emerges that is much more decipherable. So I guess I would just ask you, I mean, do you think that Trump's actual convictions inform this at all? Like, why is it that he came into office in the second term? If you go back and read his inaugural address, he's invoking William McKinley as the model that he wants to emulate in terms of foreign policy. William McKinley was the first U.S. president to ever send U.S. soldiers on expeditionary overseas missions to conquer foreign lands like the Philippines and Guam. That's who Trump, or his speechwriters who are trying to channel his instincts, that's who Trump was citing as his model for the second term. Then we start hearing about wanting to seize Greenland, wanting to seize Canada. I guess that was a joke, but it stopped being funny after a while. The Panama Canal. He declares himself the ruler of Gaza. So he told the imams in Michigan, right, that he wants to get the war over with or something, which means expediting munitions to Israel so they can pulverize Gaza harder and faster, and victory can be declared and a ceasefire can be brokered that will then allow the U.S. and Israel to rearm for an Iran confrontation. Trump didn't let the imams in on that secret. But then we have Venezuela,
that's really
where he's taking the oil. So, like, I mean, I think you would acknowledge, right, that to the extent we can identify any ideological through line in Donald Trump, going back to his first appearance on the public stage, let's trace it to 2015, and now has been much more fleshed out and made real and reified in the second term, which is organized around just actualizing Trump's sort of unfettered ambitions and desires, in contrast with the first term, where he faced some bureaucratic roadblocks, right, and some personnel choices who were a little bit inimical to him. This is true Trump. This is what we got in the second term. This is what people were voting for. And he's been saying for a long time, take the oil. His big critique of George W. Bush was, yeah, maybe some of the death and destruction in Iraq wasn't great, but if you're going to go in, take the oil. And then, sure enough,
Trump does set up a policy in Syria in the first term where he takes the oil so that the revenues can't go into the central Assad government at the time. Now he's taken the oil in Venezuela, just like he tried to do regime change in Venezuela in the first term, but it was a much more haphazard attempt. And he's taken the natural resources in Ukraine through the so-called minerals deal that he sent Besson to organize. So like, is this not an ideology at some point that could help explain why it is that now he's also saying he wants to take the oil in Iran once he's done with it and personally control the Strait of Hormuz? Or is this just all so random and like nothing can be extrapolated from it?
All right, go,
Kurt. He obviously has views, but like you're arguing that there is a Trumpism, which is, you know, a controversial argument. And then you're arguing that Trumpism is basically like a more amoral version of what Ben Shapiro thinks. And like, I just think this is like, it's just a way overdetermined argument. I mean, my like, it just doesn't allow for any of the sort of roller coasters of policy that we've seen with Trump. We saw Trump negotiate with the Iranians. We saw Trump bomb the Iranians. We saw the Trump give the Ukrainians what some alleged are a pro-Russian or even Russian talking points deal. Then we see Trump at the UN saying that we need to take back all of Ukraine. The guy vacillates all the time. And fundamentally,
what's the policy? There's policy continuity. That kind of cuts through the noise in terms of his scattershot.
Okay, Kurt, explain.
Negotiation. He has no patience for negotiation. And so war is the super button that he can press. And pretty much from Soleimani to Baghdadi to Borat bagging Maduro to even the 12-day war, although we saw cracks of his stress there at the end with the, you know, neither of these guys know what the F they're doing, quote. Pretty much it's been a super button that has worked for him. Now, I'll always add that, you know, none of these things heightened his popularity. None of them helped him, but didn't hurt him either by the polls, not much. And so he pressed the button again under pressure too. I mean, is it not relevant that Netanyahu flew to Mar-a-Lago over Christmas? And is it not relevant then all of a sudden Iran crisis started right then and there? Is it not relevant? What?
Of course it's relevant, but could it also be the case that Trump views Netanyahu as an ideological fellow traveler in lots of ways, and they can therefore collaborate to achieve Trump's desired objectives?
They're not ideological fellow travelers.
Apparently they are. So they're not ideologically aligned on this war with Iran?
Netanyahu is a right-wing Zionist Jewish American or kind of American guy, right? I think fair to say. He is a small government figure within Israel. He is a political. No, that's actually. I mean, that's his domestic policies, like deregulation, Reaganomics.
Right. Yeah. Liberalization, economic.
Liberal, whatever. Yeah, and like, you know, he's kind of a normie-con in like the American tradition. That's why he was feted around the Bush administration. That's why he was close, both personally and ideologically, with Mitt Romney.
But not Barack Obama.
What? No, not Barack Obama.
Right.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, Netanyahu is a fairly established entity. Trump is all over the place, has a completely different background. The idea that they really like super agree on that much as human beings or as political animals, I think is just overstated.
Well, they seem to agree enough on Iran that Trump decided for the first time in history to launch joint military offensives. I think
he's under a tremendous amount of pressure to do it, and he's buckled.
But by who? By Bibi?
Yeah, by Bibi, by Mossad, by the whole thing.
So, by Mossad.
Sure.
So what's the pressure that Mossad is exerting? Is this where the Epstein angle comes in as well? Like there's sexual blackmail?
I think the Epstein stuff is relevant.
So explain that theory.
We don't have all the information.
No, but if you're saying it's relevant, on what basis is it relevant?
You're the one who's willing to say.
What information do you have that leads you to believe that it's relevant?
So, Kurt, you're speculating that Epstein might be associated with this?
Put me out on a limb. Yes.
But based on what?
Based on how strange he is behaving around this investigation, and based on Jeffrey Epstein's clear ties to Israel.
Okay. And you're saying that could be a causal factor in why the United States is at war with Iran?
I think it is relevant.
But, you know, I'm constantly being pressed to provide evidence for my statements around Jeffrey Epstein, which I'm happy to do because, unfortunately, I know way too much of the primary source material. But then you could just toss out some kind of like vaguely speculative claim, and that's sufficient without any real evidence.
I think a mixture of financial incentives.
Are you claiming like there's a sexual blackmail situation that's coercing Trump into?
It's possible.
Okay, but no evidence for that. No evidence, in fact, at all that Jeffrey Epstein blackmailed anyone, which is what the FBI concluded in internal memoranda in the so-called Epstein files that they never thought were going to see the light of day.
I think there are ways of blackmailing people that are less overt than you're implying.
Like what?
I mean, why are there cameras in all the guys' pictures? Why is he taking pictures?
There aren't cameras. See, this is okay. So, I mean, if you're going to posit that Jeffrey Epstein is somehow a potentially decisive reason why Trump attacked Iran, maybe you should learn some of the basic details of the Epstein case, which is that there were not cameras in every bedroom and bathroom.
So you take
which rooms? Which rooms were they in?
Mike, I say something, and then you take the maximal interpretation of what
okay, tell me what you're saying about the cameras.
I believe that there are first-hand accounts of cameras inside of pictures in his properties.
First-hand accounts by whom?
People who went to his houses.
Inside of pictures?
Yes.
So you're not talking about hidden cameras in bedrooms or?
Yeah, like inside of like you go into the house and like you'd have like
that's in the New York townhouse where Eric Weinstein wove out a whole theory about how he saw a camera in a photo in the vestibule.
I know Eric recently,
and then also the claims about blackmail came from some of the most unreliable people that ever walked the face of Earth, meaning Maria Farmer, who's just a hallucinatory mess, Virginia Roberts Gouffre. I'm sure you don't care about that stuff because it's fun to just kind of excitedly speculate. But like once you drill down the details,
I do care.
That makes this whole thesis all the more absurd. And what's it got to do with Trump?
Just because the biggest sort of tabloid craze story of all time has false accusers, has information that doesn't line up, doesn't mean that there's not a major story here.
What's the story?
The story here is where did this guy get all his money?
We know how he got lots of his money.
What?
I mean, that's an answerable question. It seems like people who want to constantly pose that question don't want to know what information is in the public record that could answer it, at least in large part. We don't have fully comprehensive information, probably.
We know this guy is emailing people all day and doing all these meetings all day. What is he never doing? He's almost never trading anything. He's not managing assets. Like, it's not very unusual. It's very unusual.
I mean, he is doing quite a bit of work, and
the Times did a very good piece on like the most plausible, sort of innocent, like rise of Epstein, kind of like ladies' man who would get kind of lie and BS and get from accounts to accounts. And I'm not arguing that none of that happened, but I also think at a certain point, like you just don't become a guy who's obviously associated with the CIA, if not Mossad, in your mid-30s.
Obviously associated with the CIA, meaning what? That he met with Bill Burns?
Drop Site News, TAC has done a number of reports on this.
Drop Site News is another. I mean, they presuppose the existence. If you look at what Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussein have said, what they do is they fish out anything that could be potentially tantalizing that connects in any way to Israel. And they amplify that in connection to Epstein, and they take for granted that Epstein, yes, was also on top of that running a globe-spanning child sex trafficking and blackmail operation. So then when some little snippet of info comes out on Israel, we all then take that in the context of this larger operation he's supposedly running, for which there's no evidence.
Skeptical of the narrative, you're angry about it, I understand.
I'm not angry about it.
You think nothing's going on. You think
I never said nothing is going on. There's lots going on. I've probably read more of this material than anybody.
For thinking that you are asserting that you think nothing is going on. Like,
no, I'm asking what you're asserting, and then I'm questioning whether there's satisfactory evidence for it. I never said there's nothing going on with Jeffrey Epstein. Obviously, he did have one of the most amazing Rolodexes in world history.
Individual, likely connected to one, if not more, intelligence agencies, likely Israel's. He is a player within politics, finance, and celebrity world in the United States and abroad.
Yeah, he's connected to Israel. He's connected to France. He's connected to Britain. He's connected to the United States. He's connected to Saudi Arabia. He's connected to. He's connected to lots of top government officials in lots of countries. But people hone in on Israel exclusively
So they don't even know that he has, for example, connections to French government officials. That they hone in on Israel because then that allows them to create this elaborate sort of interpretive paradigm for things that go on in the world that is somehow Israel pulling the strings, which I object to because I've always been trying to impart on people the need for a rational critique of Israel, not a critique of Israel where you just insinuate things like Tucker does. I'm not saying you agree with Tucker 100%, but you insinuate things that Israel's behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk. They're behind a massive child rape and blackmail operation. They're behind, beguiling Trump into bombing Iran. Everything that goes wrong now, it seems, is ultimately sourceable to Israel in a way that I don't think gives us a good apprehension of what the Israel lobby is or the influence that it exerts. I covered these Democratic primaries that AIPAC actually intervened in a somewhat unusual way for them by actually, endorsing candidates and spending against, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush and so forth, and trying to get in these more conventionally pro-Israel Democrats. I'm all in favor of covering that stuff. I object, though, when Israel becomes this totalizing narrative that then just gives you this sort of easy way to rationalize stuff and not acknowledge that Trump has had this resource extraction ideology. I mean, does Trump have any ideology at all? Like, did you listen to his inaugural address? Do you hear him talk about how he now wants to be taking Cuba because he's so thrilled with how his other conquests have been going? Like, what do we make of that? Like, what does Israel have to do with Greenland or Cuba or Venezuela?
He has a mercantilist, zero-sum economic view of the world. And I think you see that in his inability to manage the Iran crisis. He thinks that just because the U.S. has a bunch of oil and gas, that U.S. consumers will be shielded from a global market, right? I mean, this is pretty obvious. So I'm not the one making these sort of totalizing arguments. I'm arguing he has certain views. These views become salient at certain times and less salient at other times. And I'm arguing that Israel is a major player, and I'm arguing that Jeffrey Epstein is highly associated with Israel.
Right. So you're sort of dot connecting. Israel is influential in American politics. Jeffrey Epstein may have had some, quote, connections or ties to Israel. So we're doing almost like Russiagate redux, right? Because you could always posit some tie between Russia and the Trump orbit, right?
Far more substantiation for Israelgate than Russiagate.
I'm not sure. I mean, there were some, quote, ties, if you want to use that loose terminology.
Saying I stand with Russia.
And you might recall, I was one of the very few first people with any media adjacency whatsoever to get involved from a critical perspective on the Russiagate thing back in July of 2016 when Jeffrey Goldberg was first whipping it up in the Atlantic along with David Frum and so forth. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I do think that now this Russiagate thing this Epstein thing rather is taken on almost this weird parallel universe character of this, but it's Russiagate, but for the people who wanted to support Trump on anti-interventionist grounds. Now they have their own little Russiagate where like every dot can be spuriously connected and it goes back to Israel. And that's what's pulling the strings with Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Like, we don't know for sure that he had the cameras in the bedrooms, but Eric Weinstein said something on a podcast in 2019.
You don't concede nuance in the people.
What's the nuance I should concede to?
I've just laid out a lot more nuance than how you are.
I agree that Israel's influential.
Then what are we arguing about?
We're arguing about the proportionality of the influence that's being currently assigned to Israel vis-a-vis the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, who pulled off this historic feat of winning a non-consecutive term in 2024 to fulfill his ideological ambitions. That stuff is all being shunted to the side so we can all monomaniacally focus on the podcast circuit on Israel and Tucker and whatnot. That's my problem.
It's not being shunted to the side. If anything, you see timidness from the Democratic leadership to oppose this war or to investigate Israel. So, if anything, it's being ghettoized just to a bunch of people you know.
How about the American conservative?
What do you mean?
I mean, do you think that the proportionality is correct as to Trump's own culpability for this? I know I spoke to Scott McConnell, who was the founder of the American Conservative, who is now despondent because he says that he bought into this whole line, hook, line, and sinker in 2024, even though he had been very wary in the first Trump term about Trump's policy actions on Iran in particular. You might remember I covered Tulsi Gabbard before anybody did, and I knew her personally very well and could recite her positions probably
with enough specificity to a fault, and I was with her in New Hampshire the day that Trump decided to drone strike assassinate Qasem Soleimani, the most revered military figure in Iran, when he was on some diplomatic mission to Iraq. And you know what Tulsi Gabbard said at the time? Because I still got it on my phone.
War crime, Trump should be impeached.
She said that Trump has instigated on false premises a state of war with Iran that is going to invariably lead to a regime change war by concocting a false imminent threat. Now, Tulsi Gabbard was amazingly prescient when she pointed that out with Trump, but then it all got sort of obscured.
That she probably thought that she probably meant in 2020, not in 2026. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, if Trump retained power, that's why she was saying, at least at the time.
No,
who knows what she thinks now, that she was running to defeat him. And do you agree with Joe Kent's resignation letter, where he says that the main explanation for this war is that Trump was deceived by Israel, just as George W. Bush was similarly deceived by Israel to invade Iraq? Really? Is that the all-consuming thesis we're going with now?
Not the word that I would chosen, but I think Kent's letter was heroic and accurate, basically.
I think it spoke to some personal integrity to actually resign, unlike Tulsi. But then he puts out all this nonsense that kind of just muddles the issue.
Why did you bring up the magazine?
Well, because I wrote for the American Conservative for a number of years. I was pretty aware of the sentiments expressed there. Like Daniel Larison is somebody who I follow for a long time, and he's always been extremely clear-sighted on the issue of Trump and Iran in particular. He covered that daily for the American Conservative. He's now independent, and there was just nobody sounding these notes at all at the American Conservative in the 2024 election, as I recall. Or until very recently, like until February 28th, I guess, that was the point of no return. But prior to that, we were getting all this apologia for Steve Witkoff, who, I mean, if you're talking about the nefarious influence of Israel on U.S. politics, how did Steve Witkoff get a pass? This guy was attending IDF fundraisers, and Jared gets insinuated back into the scene. So, like, I don't know. It just seems like
we were pretty harsh in the 12-day war. We were supportive of the administration pursuing.
I remember you doing a Steve Witkoff win counter because he just keeps on winning.
Yeah, I thought Witkoff.
Why? Because he did these pretextual, bogus negotiations that were
So unlike you, Michael,
that were structured in such a way that they could never actually lead to a diplomatic outcome.
I don't sit here and assume doom. I don't assume that I know everything. And so, yeah, Witkoff's background when he was named in December of 2024 to me was concerning. I did not think that this implied a guy who was going to do my kind of foreign policy. I thought the transition was disappointing, and I thought that was case in point. But then 3 days before Trump was ever inaugurated, Witkoff imposed a ceasefire on the Israelis. That Netanyahu.
Brett McGurk.
Okay, partially with the Biden administration, but who had the heft? Who's going to be president in 3 days? I think Mr. Trump. And so, I was like, wow, this guy might be pretty surprising. And then his statements about, all we need to do is get a no nuclear weapon deal. That wasn't a no nuclear enrichment. He wasn't talking like that. It's like, I could do one of two things. It could be like, this guy's a Zionist creature that I need to distrust unless he does everything I want and just assume all the worst about him. Or I could say, let's give this guy a chance. And he and his team said he flew to Oman, which is not super easy to get to. I believe 7 to 9 times before the 12-day war. He seemed to be trying. He seemed better than Jared. Jared's college roommate, Adam Buller, the hostage negotiation, said, I think, responsible things about Hamas, which is like, yes, this has a militant wing. Obviously, it is a radical group in many ways. But, their moderate wing are human beings that you could potentially do a durable deal with. That's Adam Buller. That's a Trump administration official, close to Kushner. So these guys weren't made up. They didn't say this stuff. And like, you can believe one of two things. You can believe that it's just, ultimately it didn't matter. Or I think the implications of what you're saying are actually more extreme, which is like that they were lying, that there was a massive cabal.
No. I mean, I'm not saying there's overt lying necessarily. I'm just saying that we should follow the evidence as best we can.
The evidence was.
And the evidence did not substantiate, for example, Tucker, I know not you, but Tucker, the leader of this milieu in a way, interviewing Witkoff early on in the second Trump administration. I think this was March of 2025. Yeah. And here's the headline of that interview. Quote, Steve Witkoff's critical role in negotiating global peace and the warmongers trying to stop him. So always and ever,
it's this mythical showdown between Trump and his, close confidants like Witkoff from the New York and South Florida real estate world. They're always clashing with the so-called neocons or establishment. Like, it's never the case that Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump might have convergent interests and beliefs. I mean, it must just be a total coincidence that Lindsey Graham was the very first U.S. senator to endorse Trump's third run for the presidency.
As somebody who went on Carlson's show weeks earlier on a similar subject, the Pentagon personnel wars, I'm not sure he was so much talking about like a rivalry within the cabinet as much as people that were trying to go after Witkoff and the diplomatic approach in the media in DC. And that was a very real thing. Foundation for Defense of Democracies was not complimentary, Mr. Witkoff.
Yeah, but they're delusional in like a million different ways.
Yes, but they're very influential, and they're an Israel lobby group. And the White House has literally been caught copying and pasting from their website. Like,
Trump in 2024. Did I just imagine this, or did I dream this? Trump in 2024. What was his criticism of Biden and Harris vis-a-vis Israel? It's that they were not subservient enough, essentially, to Israel, or they were not lavish enough in their provision of munitions to Israel. He said that Biden and Harris were in hock to anti-Semites, and they were kowtowing to Hamas, and he would show them who's boss and show the world what a true pro-Israel policy was like. Did he not say that?
Did he say things to the contrary?
He said to the contrary. He did.
What did he say to the contrary?
He said he was very anti-war, so he was going to get out of all these wars. These wars would never happen.
So occasionally he would throw out some meaningless platitude. But when it actually got down to brass tacks in terms of the policy, it was always an ardently pro-Israel policy. And sure enough, that much heralded ceasefire, when they come into office, so Trump can get his Reagan 1981 hostage moment.
You could have the view that the anti-war
that was systematically undermined, and Trump expedited, just as he promised to do, heavier munitions to Israel during the so-called ceasefire period, and systematically undermine the ceasefire in conjunction with Israel. Didn't he do that?
All right, let Kurt talk now.
You could have the view that the anti-war right are suckers and they should never have trusted Trump. That's a view. Daniel Larison, I think, has that view. Other people have that view. That's fine. And to a large extent, that has been borne out by history. I think it is hilarious, though, to have that view in tandem that the Israel lobby just doesn't really matter that much.
But I've never said that. I thought I was just getting lectured for not acceding to nuance or mischaracterizing your view in the most maximalist way. I've never said the Israel lobby doesn't matter. I'm saying again, its influence has been strategically exaggerated or overemphasized again to exculpate Trump because people don't want to deal with his actual worldview.
You think he has this you think he actually knows the first thing about William McKinley, and he's like, oh, this is incredible, and I want to run this extremely weird empire. Like, I
don't think he's sitting around reading dense William McKinley biographies, but he has speechwriters who channel his instincts for his inaugural address, which is one of the main historical records that is going to be looked back on to explain the second Trump term, just like the infamous Bush Freedom Agenda 2005 inaugural address, right, which was supposed to be an encapsulation of his, quote, neoconservative ideology. Trump encapsulated his ideology to some degree in the January 2025 address. And he chose, or his speechwriters chose, to channel the instincts of William McKinley. And then sure enough, Trump does start talking about how he wants to go around the world conquering these territories. So, I mean, we're not going to cast blame of any kind on the Israel lobby for Trump saying, once he's done with Iran, we're going to take Cuba, right? So how do we explain that? It's just this free-floating, vague mercantilism, or should we take Trump a bit more seriously at this point, especially after he had 4 years in the wilderness to stew over his political views and maybe crystallize things and have them mature to some degree?
Sure.
And he somehow had this brilliant idea that he's going to stomp around the world, overthrowing governments, seizing resources, and declaring himself the ruler of as many far-flung territories as he can.
It's weird that
is he not doing that?
You think he didn't betray his campaign at all? You think that everybody just imagined this is crazy, that just was massive?
No, I don't. Not in 2024. I mean, 2016 there was no record. 2016 you did just have to discern instincts or his pundit commentary or an offhand remark that he might have made somewhere. not with the totality of data and evidence we have by 2024. Especially if he came out in public and endorsed the concept of a joint U.S.-Israeli military operation to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. He said that. I have the clip.
Okay, not really sure what we're debating anymore.
Okay, I want to interject here. And by the way, just for people listening, my debate philosophy is just to let people talk as much as possible, but without interrupting.
Fine. It's fine. I'm a grown man.
Rav, do you follow what the disagreement is here, or is everybody confused as to what we're debating?
So I like to let people talk as much as possible, but
I was being slightly facetious.
Okay, I got you.
Okay, so for people listening, and for you guys as well, I like to let people talk as much as possible, but I'm keeping score of various points that.
Kurt, so here's a point. Here's a broader point. Let's even step away from Trump for a second. I actually do think maybe I have a little bit of an unusual perspective on presidential power, because a lot of people like to point to these structural factors that guide presidential decision making or influence it. I'm not denying that can be a real factor. I just think that we tend to underappreciate the extent to which a president's personal ideology is actually, for better or worse, I would say worse, because I would prefer, if I had my way, to have the president enjoy less unconstrained unilateral power, especially when it comes to foreign policy and war making.
Yep.
But Joe Biden had a very defined ideology that I think was very instructive as to why his policy was the way it was with Ukraine. And also Israel, where he actually would say he's a Zionist. Trump doesn't say that because he couldn't define Zionism, right?
Atlanticism and Zionism, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And, Barack Obama had some pretty well-defined foreign policy views. George W. Bush did to some degree too, or at least he had a cadre around him that incubated a certain worldview. Likewise with Trump, I'm not sure what the resistance is to acknowledging that at this point. He's not some novice on the scene.
He operated in a much wider ideological space of trying to be all things to all men, and that was not lost on me. I knew this in 2024 that it was a weird situation where the moderates on a lot of foreign policy questions were actually for the Democratic ticket, and the extremists, particularly on Israel-Palestine stuff, Israel-Iran stuff. So you had the most virulent pro-Israel Zionist voices in America who were for Trump, and you also had imams in Michigan, imams in Pennsylvania.
Have you ever gone to Israel and asked people to give you their opinion on Trump? It's always the most vehement, religious, right-wing people who are the most fervent in supporting Trump, to the point that they emblazon his visage over a commemorative coin of King Cyrus.
Yeah, and I was always uncomfortable with that. And because
Ben Gvir actually broke the ministerial code in Israel to endorse Trump.
I've got a few clarifying questions. So, Michael, for you, and I'm keeping score of a few very important points, and also I'll lay my cards on the table here, which is that
I haven't been trying to dunk enough. So
please,
I'll lay my cards on the table here.
Go Shaquille O'Neal on me.
I'm very open-minded to both your guys' view, and I want to be convinced one way or the other. And the part of the problem is this is not like a mathematical equation. It's like
I hope
Michael is just emphasizing less the role of Israel here, and Kurt, you're emphasizing more. And I want to more precisely pin this down. And I'm going to try and ask a few questions to clarify this.
50-50. I'll just do it right now.
Yeah. No, I'm going to return to that in a second. Michael, question for you: If Trump wasn't pressured by Netanyahu for over the past year to wage this war in Iran, do you think he would have done it?
I'm not trying to evade the question, but it's almost like a nonsense question, because how could we imagine a Middle East where Israel is not an appendage of U.S. primacy, where Iran is not this bogeyman for the past 5 decades? I'm not even sure how to answer that. And also, it's kind of counterfactual. So at the same time, yeah, of course, Netanyahu's lobbying was a significant factor. I've never denied that. I've never denied that the force of his lobbying as a factor, or the domestic pro-Israel lobby in the United States as a factor, although I think people have gotten a little bit fuzzy in terms of what they're even defining anymore as the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. It's not just AIPAC and their literal PAC that intervenes in congressional primaries and so forth. It's much more broad and loose than that in terms of what people seem to be referring to nowadays. And actually, even Mearsheimer and Walt, who agree with Kurt on Jeffrey Epstein, they don't have any evidence, but they say, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein probably was the reason why Trump went to war with Iran. So I think that speaks to the limits of their outlook on this stuff. But No, I mean, I think it's, I don't know. I mean, if you had a less of a bulldog as the Israeli prime minister, who maybe had less of a kinship with Trump, could it have been the case that maybe he doesn't go through with it? Look, I guess it's possible. But I also think that to the degree that Trump did succumb to the quote unquote pressure, it was in virtue of him regarding Netanyahu's Israel as consonant with Trump's perception of how to best project American interests and power, and also set about on these resource extraction quests like he had just gotten done with in Venezuela, and was trying to bulldoze the Europeans to acceding to in Greenland, and on and on and on. Like, he literally had just declared himself the ruler of Venezuela, the ultimate governing authority with ultimate veto power in Venezuela, just like he did in Gaza in October of 2024, when he struck that so-called ceasefire deal that we're told was also anathema to the quote neocons. And it might be because I don't think the neocons would have been so audacious as to have Bush or Rumsfeld or Romney or whomever else, McCain, declare themselves the literal sovereign governing authority in Gaza. I don't think they would have been as audacious as Trump was. The neocons tend to be a little bit more effete, or a little bit more, I don't know. They like to kind of keep things more in the realm of abstraction than that, where Trump just goes full bore. But look, I mean, if you're viewing this all through the prism of the 2024 election fundamentally being a ideological showdown between Donald Trump on one hand and the Cheneys on the other, which is how it got set up. Yeah, in part because of the Democrats choosing to emphasize Liz Cheney. But I wrote at the time, who agrees with Liz Cheney? Trump actually agrees with Liz Cheney on policy level on X, Y, and Z issue, and yes, including most prominently Iran and Israel and even Afghanistan, because Trump decided to debut in the 2024 campaign this revelation that he was never actually intending on withdrawing from Afghanistan, despite the phony deal that he came up with Pompeo. He was going to keep a permanent occupation force there, just like Liz Cheney wanted. So I don't know. What I'm ultimately sort of lamenting here is a lack of journalistic discretion or something to kind of parse through these platitudes and the sloganeering and the propaganda so we can better inform the public. I mean, maybe it's hokey or maybe it's old fashioned, but that's like kind of what I at least consider myself, my own brain, to be most wanting to do.
You're in the opinion game.
What's that?
Fair. You're in the opinion game.
In the opinion game.
You're not writing AP copy.
Yeah, I'm not writing AP copy. I do. Right. I mean, I try to incorporate as much reporting as I can. But
I know.
But you have opinions. Okay.
So TAC is an activist journalism. Okay. And we have a perspective. The magazine was founded against the Iraq War. Here now is the Iran War. So it's not really a surprise that we're going to be against the Iran War. The magazine was an early supporter and platformer of the Israeli lobby perspective. So it's not a surprise it was going to be a factor in our journalism.
I started reading in high school.
Okay. I do just for the audience. I think, though, I don't want to say like it's so much your responsibility, but when you're so confrontational about the way other people roll. So I said at the beginning of the conversation, I don't have any objection to the way that you conduct yourself in your journalism. I really don't. Long-time admirer, frankly. But I think where it potentially goes a little far is the sort of, I'm not saying you're doing this, but is implicitly sort of evangelist, which is like other people aren't really doing this. So for an ideological magazine, sort of like PaleoCon, flagship, whatever you want to call it, like TAC, we sort of have to assess the politics in the here and now, right? So like, for instance, I bet you're going to hesitate to give me an answer. Maybe I'm wrong. So
go ahead.
You think, I didn't think we were talking about 2024 election so much tonight, but we are. Do you think that people should have voted for Kamala Harris? Did you vote for Kamala Harris?
No, I did not. I didn't vote for either of them. I mean, I wrote a big piece spelling out my reasoning for why.
And I've had this conversation. Who did you vote for?
I wrote in a cartoon character.
Okay.
Fred Flintstone, actually, because I was channeling my premonition that we were all going to be hurtling into the Stone Age. And actually, Trump,
you voted for enough,
did just declare last night that he's going to be bombing Iran to the Stone Age, and then Hegseth repeated it. So maybe I was right with my premonition.
So my view and I've given it to people who vote third party, and I've voted third party as well. So I'm not critical, but when I did, I had a very clear view, and I think this is borderline. Everything else is kind of navel gazing. If you vote third party, let's not say like a Perot 92 situation, right, where people maybe thought he could still win or something.
Fred Flintstone doesn't have a party, by the way. It was just
Okay.
a throwaway vote.
He can't serve. He's not a person. I think we agree to that. When you vote third party, it implies agnosticism about who wins the election, that you think both sides are just as bad. That
Not necessarily.
Okay, so I find that annoying because
Why? So I have critiques. I don't support either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, and I'm not going to affirm my. I'm not going to affirm them by way of my vote.
It reeks of purity. It really does.
Okay, but everybody can come up with their own rationale for why. I don't evangelize for anybody to vote the way that I do. I wrote in my big explanation piece for why I voted the way I did that I recognize I'm in the extreme minority.
Okay, Kurt, go.
You are welcome to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But you come after a lot of people for not thinking quite like you. And
that's not true. I just address that. I'm not trying to upbraid anybody who voted for Donald Trump. I don't go out in the street saying, "Hey, mister, did you vote for Donald Trump? If so, let me read you the riot act." It's people in the media with platforms and with political influence who contributed to propagating a false impression of the most, I think you would agree, the most important political figure of our era.
In 2024, who did you think, on balance, was the better major party candidate, even if you didn't vote for them?
To me, I was agnostic as to that because
you thought they were equally bad or equally good.
I thought they were both bad for sometimes overlapping and sometimes distinct reasons. Like I wasn't going to co-sign a continuation of the Biden foreign policy status quo, but nor was I going to participate in this reimagination of Donald Trump as some kind of crusader against the deep state and some anti-war person when we had so much data from the first term. Like,
that's fine.
Kurt, do you think anybody should have been surprised that he successfully did regime change or regime altercation or modification in Venezuela when he finally had the weight of the federal government organized around him in a more structured way? When he tried to do that very thing in the first term and screwed it up, like, was this unforeseeable?
Let Kurt respond. I've talked to these people. He pursued parallel tracks. There was a real negotiation. Grinnell's one of his boys. That was a real negotiation. Rubio outwon. Like, you imply this massive fait accompli.
If the negotiation says flee the country forthwith, or we're coming in militarily, that's not a reasonable negotiation. That's not a JCPOA negotiation. Just when he negotiates by declaring a 60-day ultimatum.
Let Kurt finish. Let Kurt finish, then Mike will go. Okay, Kurt.
Okay, I'm really not getting a word in edgewise here.
Sorry.
That's not what Grinnell did in H1 of 2025. Grinnell, who's kind of running a shadow Secretary of State or shadow State Department against Rubio, was tasked. He got hostages out of Venezuela. There was a more diplomatic path. Venezuela was very much the story, particularly after the 12-day war, which was the real hawkish turn of the administration, of Rubio being a better politician than Rick Grinnell, a cannier lobbyer for his perspective, and cobbling together a few incentives for Trump to make this decision. Number one, Trump started liking military action, reminding him that he sort of enjoyed it, right? Which is not always salient in his mind. Number two, there's like a Latino conservative lobby. You would concede that, right? That's a real thing.
I was just in Miami with them.
Yeah. Trump now lives there, right? So I think that's actually more like he always had the house there, but he's perma there, or was during much more than he was in the first term. And then that Rubio won that out. But like your analysis implies that this whole sort of debate within the administration never occurred. Now, that might not be a reason to vote for the administration. You'd be like, what Kurt's saying is kind of pathetic. Like, this had a 10% chance of working, and Trump is very dangerous, and you shouldn't vote for them. But what I think is sort of interesting then, I think if you think that, I kind of think you should, if you think Trump is so dangerous, and you think this stuff is so off the rails, I kind of think you should say you should vote for Harris.
Well, I don't agree. I mean, that wasn't my own personal calculation, and I spelled this out in great detail in an essay that people can look up if they want from November of 2024, because especially again, this is somewhat me in a niche journalistically, but me not wanting to almost like psychically align myself with a particular candidate unless I can proactively make an affirmative case for them, which I could not for either Trump or Harris. So that's just my own spin on what my reasoning is for my own private personal vote. I don't lecture anybody else to do that, and especially not people, especially not ordinary citizens. I just think that, if you end up coming to a rationale for your support, if you're in the media, right? If you're a journalist, okay, then there's some different criteria that I'm going to be analyzing you through, especially if you got a big platform. Right. And, if you decide that it's totally cool and, justifiable to do as Tucker did and outright endorse Donald Trump, speak at the Republican convention, go around Pennsylvania campaigning for him at campaign stops, use your huge independent media audience to proselytize for Donald Trump, and you're putting out a false image. It's not just me trying to tell Tucker, oh, you got to do exactly what I do in my own idiosyncratic way in terms of how I decide my vote. It's me looking at his public output and noting that it contributed to fomenting this radically false impression of what people were getting from, yes, the most outsized and probably long-lastingly significant American political figure of our age. That's a problem for me. And I think it should be for anybody who considers himself a rational chronicler of American politics.
I'm pro Tucker, but I'm not Tucker. So,
okay. I was too, but then he starts talking about Pizzagate and pizza and grape soda and this is Israel's war. It's not America's war. Like nothing is ever Trump's doing because he loves it, because he likes Trump so much, and I guess his son works for Vance or whatever. So it's like just this tangle of conflicts of interest that I don't think is conducive to what I, maybe in my slightly melodramatic way, see it as my supreme prerogative, which is truth seeking as best I can, rather than access preservation.
So Kurt, I asked Michael if Trump would have done what he's doing now in Iran without any influence from Israel, and he wasn't sure. He didn't really have a strong answer. Kurt, do you have a strong answer to that about what would have happened?
No way. It's too risky. It's not like people are stretching to find Trump statements from the 80s where he talked about Carg Island.
That is weird. I didn't know that until recently that he had a particular preoccupation with Carg Island. I
don't remember him campaigning on Carg Island. No. So, I think look, my position is simple, and I'm not so sure I think the clash here is almost more aesthetic and emphasis is stylistic more than what we actually think is the truth, although I think not fully. Israel.
I'm still confused. But
Israel set the table. Trump ate the meal. It's that simple.
Okay, so Trump might have not campaigned specifically on Carg Island, but he did campaign saying his policy from the first term on Iran was great, which included maximum pressure sanctions, coming within what he said was minutes of bombing Iran in June of 2019, drone assassinating Soleimani. Go look at what Tulsi Gabbard said during this time about how that was all ineluctably leading to a regime change confrontation with Iran.
I think there was
and then he's also pledging in 2024 to ratchet up the bellicosity, right? So maybe not Carg Island in particular, but Trump set the stage. Bibi's there with the fork and knife. He sees that Trump's raring to go with the main course, and then he gives him a nudge, and there you go. So at what point is Trump actualizing his own desires here? Is it always Rubio outflanking Grinnell? Is it always Bibi outflanking? I don't know who would be his nemesis.
I think we got the point. Okay.
Okay.
There was a view that Trump really only cared about leaving the Iran deal because of Obama. I pretty much agree with that. Trump, even in the campaign, actually said he wouldn't leave the Iran deal. He said he opposed it, but he wouldn't leave it. It's a forgotten thing. So it's
in 2016.
Yeah, on one debate stage, he said he opposed the deal, but you don't necessarily need to leave the deal once we're in the deal. Of course, he retracted on that. There was a view that the sort of populist right, the new right, whatever you want to call it, the anti-war right, was thoroughly unprepared to staff an administration, and so it was staffed by hawks and neocons who fed him a bunch of
in the first term.
Yeah.
Not the second. Second, we're in a brave new world, right? Supposedly the new right being.
I'm trying to explain why people thought this might happen. So that's like designating the IRGC a terrorist organization that's like sanctioning everything from the Iranian space program to healthcare system, whatever the hell.
Sanctioning them during COVID so they could not import medical supplies.
I'm against all of it. I'm against these sanctions. I think they're not in American interest. I think they're inhumane. And I also think they kind of don't work. The regime's more richer in some ways today because of the war than not. But like there was a view that if you got an improved personnel, the sort of leitmotif on the right was, the president's, main failure in term one was personnel. And if you got different personnel in there, and I think the exemplar of this is, the shift from Pence to Vance, right? The hope that Vance represented the tip of the spear of something very, very different. I think what this war shows is actually the limits of personnel, especially for a president like Trump, who is not making across the board administration decisions. There's almost no collaboration within the administration on this decision. People found out about it from the internet. The people who knew about it were cable news hosts, foreigners, foreign governments, Israel, and a select coterie. And so I think what we're substantively disagreeing about is why Trump is in the thrall of these people. You submit that it is like actual ideological kinship. I think it is way more like his political coalition is pressuring him to do it. I don't want to dwell on the gnarlier, conjecture of potentially intimidation, et cetera, but I think it's something that is plausible. And then moreover, something that we haven't discussed, maybe we should discuss more, is the sycophancy, actually, that the neocons are just really, 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 really good at sucking up to him.
Well, that's true. I mean, look at Elise Stefanik. Remember when she decided to rebrand as Ultra MAGA? Because she defended Trump in the first impeachment? Yeah. Meanwhile, she was, a protege of... was it Hudson Institute or Foundation for Defense of Democracies? It was one of the two. I think it was FDD. But all of a sudden, she can become Ultra MAGA because she can become the biggest Trump sycophant on the planet, and that's perfectly fine with Trump.
He's weirdly not.
But JD Vance is also a mega sycophant in his own way. He was in the Never Trump movement in 2016, back when I was criticizing them. He was saying vote for Evan McMullin in 2016 because Trump is so intolerable, whereas I was opposed to the quote neocons that year and pointing to their fallacious renderings of Donald J. Trump. JD Vance was on the opposite side of that argument, with maybe that by 2024 somehow he does this ideological makeover where he's now representing this fledgling restraint caucus in the Republican Party, right? Which was always a total misnomer. Sorry, am I back? He always supported arming Ukraine, including when he ran in 2022. He always supported ratcheting up. I'll give you the quote. It never got emphasized. This sort of fantasy version of him got emphasized, where supposedly he was going to be, the liberals say he's doing the bidding of Putin, or he's wanting to sell out Ukraine to Russia. The online right guys think, oh, if this is our man, he's actually wanting to put a stop to the support for Ukraine or something like this. It was neither. Taiwan, he's all about, basically committing the United States to military action in the event of an incursion from the CCP. Then, lo and behold, his sycophancy has reached a nadir in the past couple of weeks when he reprised Dick Cheney. Congratulations, JD, because we all were told that the 2024 election, with you replacing Mike Pence as this innovative new addition to the ticket, right? You're going to do away with the old neocon Bush ways of Pence. You're going to bring new right energy to the ticket. What does JD Vance do, like a little sycophant that he is? He goes to the cabinet meeting last week with Trump, which is like, Kim Jong-un basically requiring everybody to kiss his ass. And JD Vance has no problem with that. And he says, look, folks, here's why the president had to do what he did in Iran, because Iran could give a dirty bomb, a nuclear bomb, to a terrorist like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and then blow up a marketplace either in Israel or the United States. I mean, he wasn't that specific about it, but he was reprising this whole Dick Cheney line from pre-March 2003 about the supposed threat of Saddam Hussein's nuclear proliferation to terrorists. That's JD Vance, who we're told was this restrainer, non-interventionist. You know what JD Vance is? Just like Rubio, a very skillful and intelligent politician who knows how to ingratiate himself into the mainframe of the Republican Party. And he leveraged that, but he became friends with Don Jr. or whatever, and Tucker. He leverages that to the VP pick. And Rubio did that
as well in his own way, although Rubio is probably more shrewd because the vice presidency is not as powerful as this hybrid Secretary of State National Security Advisor thing that Rubio is going on. So maybe Rubio got the better end of that bargain. But again, there's so much foolishness that goes into these kind of self-flattering conceptions of what the Republican Party is now, what the Trump coalition is. Go look at the polling. I'm not talking about just like self-described MAGA Republicans who support the war with like staggering degrees of unanimity. Because if you
they would have supported the opposite though. If Trump had done a deal,
maybe so. But then
that's relevant.
But then you can't say that the MAGA coalition was always in some way some sort of repudiation of Bush, right? Especially look at Trump. If the polling numbers right now, I went back and looked at Pew polling from March of 2003. It was like 90 to 93% of Republicans supported the war. Okay. Yeah. And they had around 50% of Democrats at that time. It's much lower now with Democrats, but it's the same number pretty much with Republicans, including when you filter for Trump 2024 voters. So what are we talking about here? Like, when is the rethink coming?
Okay, let's get Kurt in here. Yep.
Well, I don't really know what and we got to call it soon because I got to run. But as much as I'd love to do this, I'm not really sure we're debating anymore. I mean, what are we? And I don't mean to. What would you like
in the longer horizon? So was what was being attributed to the meaning of the Trump coalition as this resurgence of a new right that was going to break from the past, that was going to do away with Bush and Jeb, and I guess Marco at the time in 2016 was the idea, but he's back naturally. When are we due for a rethink at any point in terms of like the larger prognosis that a lot of people wanted to make, or are we just kind of going to keep going ahead with the same like 2016 time warp analysis? In light of events, in light of the data, in light of the evidence.
Okay, Kurt, and then the crucial piece I want to highlight from all what Michael said there was Trump's hawkish statements towards Iran. Like, what was your calculation on that? Because like you said you're not surprised what he's doing in Iran, but you were maybe more uncertain than Michael was.
I was well, okay. They're just all over the map. I think that this was always a possibility. Possibility I deeply feared. I think that basically, unlike Michael, I'm willing to weigh the tickets against each other and try to assess the merits. So I thought that Trump was higher risk, higher reward. And we are in the higher risk scenario. I thought that Trump, not unlike Obama, showed a greater willingness for diplomacy and face-to-face sort of. True. Remember the Obama debate, like, I'll go meet the Ayatollah.
North Korea.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, North Korea is an example. So I thought
that was undermined by the policy maximalism, right?
I thought that was plausible. I bought into some of the personnel arguments that the Republicans would be a lot more built up and in this direction. The staffers in this administration, impossible to quite quantify, but they are materially different than they were the first term. I'm not sure how relevant this is, but true. Like they are spiritually and ideologically new rightists. They like Tucker. There's difference. Based, whatever. I think it's been as has been commented by other people. I think it's
also having Tulsi as part of his cabinet too, right?
Yeah. I mean, Tulsi's in the job of Avril Haines, right? I mean, it's sort of like
how's that worked out for?
And divorcing himself from Mike Pompeo as well, right? Was that also part of your calculation, Kurt?
What?
Divorcing himself from Mike Pompeo?
That looked like an early win, but then it was over. I mean, I was against Rubio getting the Secretary of State job. I think it was a close run thing. I think he considered there was that 36-hour period where he announced, where there was a report on it, but he didn't announce it. There was a sort of like huge shadow war between him and Grinnell. So like, I mean, I don't mean to like sort of like say like, oh, well, I'm slightly more connected to like MAGA world as a reporter than Michael.
You may be. I mean, I know some people, but you may know more. There
were real fights. There were real fights, but I do respect the argument that this like structurally didn't really matter. That the Hawks were always favored, and that Trump was always inclined in this direction. But there were fights, and Trump did consider all of this.
But Rav, when you say he divorced from Pompeo, what did that mean substantively? He divorced from Pompeo, who, by the way, I went out on the final day of the campaign. I was following Trump around in Pennsylvania, and Pompeo was giving stump speeches for Trump at the Trump campaign events, and so was Rubio.
Well, I think he wanted to have the old job back.
So we were told in 2024 that Trump was getting a divorce from Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo. right? So that was going to usher in this revolution of new right thinking into the next administration.
I think the
And
Pompeo.
then who does he appoint in lieu? Who does he appoint in lieu of Mike Pompeo for Secretary of State? Rubio, who's like not ideologically dissimilar from Pompeo meaningfully at all.
Yeah,
and then instead of Nikki Haley as UN ambassador, he picks Stefanik. So it had nothing to do with the substance. It was as so often the case with Trump, a personality soap opera thing where he doesn't really have any substantive disagreements with John Bolton for the most part, but they had a personal falling out, right? And then he, sure enough, appoints to succeed John Bolton as National Security Advisor initially, Mike Waltz, who was a protege of Dick Cheney, and who Bolton actually praised because they were in such ideological affinity with one another. So again, go back to the substance, go back to the policy, forget the personality stuff.
Kurt, I know you got to go in a
it's
second.
The same trajectory.
Yeah, Kurt, I know you got to go in a minute here, but like Trump's hawkish statements towards Iran on the 2024 campaign trail, like Michael sees what he's doing now in Iran as a continuation and a rational extrapolation of what he said at the time, and he did say a lot of hawkish things towards Iran. But what was your thinking at the time that maybe he's saying these things about Iran, but he's also saying more anti-war things, so it's kind of a coin toss? Or
I thought negotiation bluster. I thought that they would potentially seriously. I mean, I wasn't so sure the way they would approach the Iran portfolio, but like once he opened up the negotiations in April of last year, so about this time last year when Netanyahu was here, and he clearly announced to Netanyahu's displeasure that negotiations were opening. What do you mean? I mean,
to Netanyahu's displeasure. Netanyahu came out like a kid in a candy shop when that announcement was made, because Netanyahu said that he and Trump were in agreement that the only viable resolution, the only viable endpoint for those negotiations was Iran somehow agreeing to have the quote Libyan model inflicted on them.
But if you go back to the clip on that, he's he's visibly uncomfortable. And additionally,
so you're just like reading body language.
Okay, all right, let's move on from this.
No, I mean, really, I mean that because like Trump.
There's reporting that the Israelis, I mean, did not expect that to happen, and that was not.
There's been a lot of goofy reporting about some kind of fissure between Netanyahu and Trump that really hasn't been borne out in the policy substance, right?
The Israelis, their preference was not negotiations. They did not want negotiations. They wanted war. They wanted this, and negotiations themselves were a detour of that. And as soon as the negotiations elapsed, the Israelis enforced a deadline to a negotiation that they weren't party to.
Well, Trump declared the deadline. Trump declared a 60-day ultimatum in the first round before midnight hammer.
Right. But Trump has declared a lot of deadlines, and they don't usually start wars. So
I don't know. That seemed like a pretty firm deadline to me. And then, like once the 60-day mark came, sure enough, the war was launched. So I don't know. I think we can make.
The Iranians were surprised about it, and so maybe everybody.
And and when I spoke to Russian government officials, they're now surprised,
the Russians
because they thought that Trump was actually going to magically solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Wasn't that part of Witkoff's portfolio? How's that going? Can we get an update sometime?
No,
so I mean, it's just like
it's very disappointing. You don't need to tell me.
Michael, I want to ask you two questions in front of Kurt. Michael, I want to ask you two questions. So
it's just like a Kurt. So like after the 2016 election, I spent a lot of time almost doing like a pundit media autopsy for how they screwed things up so badly. Tucker, the first time I was ever on his show, he's actually the Fox and Friends weekend host at the time, was to talk about a Daily Beast article that I wrote about how the media had this Trump-sized blind spot where they were missing the story in the election. They were all cloistered and insular, and they were confirmation biased, and they couldn't understand why anybody would support Trump, and et cetera, et cetera.
Michael, I really want to get to two questions
on that. And so I think we need something like that for 2024, but there's not much of an appetite for it, which again is very frustrating to me.
Sorry, because Kurt has to go. Sorry to interrupt. Michael, two questions that I want to just ask you quickly in front of Kurt. One, do you acknowledge that, at least it seems like you're not acknowledging at all, but I think you would, that Trump, in addition to his more hawkish statements, he did also say a lot of anti-war things as well that Kurt was factoring in his calculation. And then secondly, I do want to ask about Kurt said 50-50 split between, Trump and Israel in the decision. I'm curious what you make of that, or like what your calculation would be.
Trump's a very shrewd politician. He pulled off getting elected twice, the second time non-consecutively. So I think we're all in agreement, or we should be, and I've always said this, that Trump is one of the most brilliant political minds ever, maybe the most brilliant political mind in American history. because like Grover Cleveland wasn't dealing with the same media environment when he got elected to 2 non-consecutive terms.
So you don't think any of his
although I do regret that Grover Cleveland, because he's from my hometown of Cobble, New Jersey. Now got
so you don't think any of his anti-war statements were
no, not really, because he would blurt out a platitude or a slogan or something that wasn't tied to any actual tangible policy prescription. And you have Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. going around on his behalf saying utter nonsense like they did at the Madison Square Garden rally right before the election, where Tulsi Gabbard said a vote for Trump is a vote to end wars, not to start them. And RFK Jr. said voting Republican in 2024 is voting to, quote, end the warfare state, as Trump wasn't bragging incredibly openly about how he did record-busting military budgets the first term and was going to increase them even further in the second term,
Trump
which he now has 1.5 trillion. So no, I mean, I don't buy that.
But Trump
you have to have some discernment, right? You have to have some discernment.
Right?
What is tied to an actual policy prescription? What is tied to his record when he wielded power for 4 years? What is tied to what we can infer from his personnel choices? And then then project outward in a rational way, rather than just being bedazzled by him saying, oh yeah, in the abstract, we don't like war. Who says we do like war? Both Zelensky and Putin have said for the past 4 years that they both don't like war. It doesn't really mean that much until you drill down to the specifics, right? And that's what there was such a reluctance to do for some reason with Trump.
Gotta bounce.
Okay. You gotta go? Okay.
Gotta bounce. Yeah,
Michael, can I stick around for another minute? I'm going to ask a couple.
I'll stick around for sure if you'd like. I'm sure.
Okay,
have enough of me. But it's okay. I hope this was all done in good spirited, in good spirits.
No. Salud.
Take care. Take care.
Thanks, Kurt. So, Michael,
he couldn't wait to get out of there.
So, Michael, some of his more anti-war statements, like when he was campaigning.
Give me
in
an
Michigan,
example.
Hold on. When he was campaigning in Michigan, and he was saying, "I'm going to stop the bloodshed in Gaza. I'm not going to bomb any more Muslim majority countries. I'm going to put an end to wars."
Did he say, "I'm not going to bomb any more Muslim majority countries"?
He said something where he was appealing to Muslim voters in one statement. I forget what the exact statement is.
Yeah,
but
it was Michigan with the imams.
I don't want to bomb more Muslim countries. Something to that effect. But so when he said, like, I want to stop the bloodshed in Gaza and I'm not going to bomb Middle Eastern countries, like, you feel like that was just him selling himself to those people, but not actually sincerely believing any of that?
Well, go look with a little bit more precision about what he said, because I mean, I'll even play the clip right now. I actually have it.
Okay.
So this is the imam speaking in Michigan.
Are we going to get to what Trump said?
I think Trump is in this one.
He might not be in that clip, but
it might not be in that.
But he reiterated a lot of those statements or echoed those statements himself.
Hold on. I think I have his quote from Dearborn, because it's important, because that's what people are going to cite.
Yeah, sure.
Here we go. Can I pause for a second? So he says, the Muslims in Michigan and elsewhere want to stop to the endless wars, because the Republicans are smart. They have pollsters and strategists. They know that there's disenchantment with the Democrats in 2024 over Gaza and Israel policy, and they can exploit that, right?
Yep.
Especially in a state that's as crucial as Michigan. So what does he say? This constituency I'm trying to cater to, they want to stop to endless wars.
Mm-hmm.
That's a purposeful vagary. Okay, that's a platitude. What does that mean? Endless wars. Did you notice last night in his speech about the Iran war, he's contrasting it with wars that he would call maybe endless wars, like Iraq and or
Afghanistan.
Korea. He even brought up.
Did you say Afghanistan last night?
He actually didn't say Afghanistan for some reason. He did say
Okay.
Iraq, and so that's sort of like baked into the rationale that they're putting forth for why this war is something that everybody should support, because it seemed to be this like decisive deployment of brute force American power in contrast with quote nation building or whatnot. Although it should be said that Trump explicitly declared that he's going to be nation building in Gaza. He actually used that term. And so again, it's very easy to say, oh, we don't like endless wars in the abstract. I think Barack Obama said stuff to that effect. I think even Joe Biden would say stuff to that effect, and probably did. I'm sure Kamala would have said stuff to that effect. It doesn't really matter in terms of the relevance for actual policy unless you can tie it to a firm policy prescription. Otherwise, it's a nice sounding platitude that you could see the political rationale for, right? Which is why I am just very disappointed, to say the least, with people who are in the media or in like they're supposed to be covering American politics with a critical journalistic lens, hearing that stuff and just saying to themselves, "Oh, gee, that must be him running on an anti-war platform." And we're not going to look at the record from the past, from 4 years when he had power the first time. We're not going to look about the personnel. We're not going to like even analyze it for how connected it is or not to any kind of tangible policy prescription, because it simply wasn't. Because he was simultaneously saying on a firm, tangible policy level to the pro-Israel hardcore faction, like Miriam Adelson and Tom Cotton and Rubio and all these other people, that he was going to carry forth his policy paradigm from the first term when he brags that he was the most pro-Israel president ever, and if not for him, Israel would have been destroyed. He's going to do that same thing in a second term, and yeah, that does bear on Iran. So I think a discerning mind, especially if you're like a journalist, right? I'm not just talking about an average citizen who like has a job and stuff and like a family and can't spend all day pondering this stuff.
Yeah.
You should be able to use a bit more like some exactitude to not just say, oh, we're going to give equal weight to him going to Dearborn and pandering to these imams with these vague slogans as we do what is in the record as to what the policy prescriptions would be. Because even when he says we want to put an end to the war in Gaza, right? He would always say, look, he would always denounce the Biden administration for not sending munitions as aggressively as they should have to Israel for the purpose of finishing the job in Gaza, meaning pulverizing Gaza harder and faster so that we can end it. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to extend an olive branch and wave a white flag, or and then like declare that peace is broken out. And that's exactly what he did when he then got into office. Like when they had that Witkoff so-called ceasefire, Trump took the opportunity, Trump and Rubio, to expedite the heavy munitions to Israel that they whined that Biden didn't send profligately enough, even though Biden, ironically, had sent more munitions to Israel than any U.S. president ever. But for the Republicans and Trump, that wasn't enough. And Trump also elevates hardcore religious fanatics who would have been uncouth even to so-called neocons of the past, like McCain or Romney or even George W. Bush. You wouldn't have seen George W. Bush with Hegseth as his so-called war secretary. I should have asked Kurt, did Israel trick Trump and Hegseth into doing this weird rebranding thing of the Defense Department, where now it's the War Department and Hegseth is the war secretary? Right. It doesn't indicate anything about their predilections. So no, I mean, again, you are very suspiciously lacking in political wisdom and judgment if you took those offhand comments in Dearborn as to be given equal weight to the much more fulsome breadth of evidence that showed what Trump's actual policy in the Middle East would be.
Okay, so do you think he's not in any meaningful way less hawkish than the neocons like Lindsey Graham or Mark Levin or any of these people? Or do you think there is some daylight?
I don't know what neocon means anymore. I don't know what neocon means anymore. It's an obsolete term. Seriously, after the 2024 election, when he nominates Rubio and Hegseth and so forth, I wrote a whole essay. People can look it up. Is Donald Trump a neocon? And my answer was to the semi-rhetorical question was no, because neocon is not a relevant term anymore as of 2024, definitely as of 2026, right? Because look, there was a faction of actual neoconservatives in the late 90s and early 2000s that got very fixated on foreign policy, some of whom were sort of the ideologues of the first Bush administration, like Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, Richard Pearl, etc. But by 2024, neocon just came to be a pejorative term that would get slapped on anybody who one didn't like and also perceived them to have overly hawkish foreign policy views, which is like not really that well connected to like what it would have meant to be a neoconservative ideologically. So if Trump is appointing Rubio as the person who's best equipped and most compatible with him to carry out his foreign policy agenda, and Rubio was would have been seen as the arch neoconservative in the U.S. Senate, like right alongside Lindsey Graham for his entire career, essentially, then how is Trump not a neoconservative himself? So my conclusion was, let's do away from this lazy handicapping term, which obscures nowadays more than it reveals, and just describe what Trump is. Neoconservative? No, he's got his own ideology that I think is somewhat distinct from like a George W. Bush ideology, or at least what George W. Bush and his cohort avowed. In some ways, that means Trump's ideology is more extreme in its military bellicosity, because there was also an Israel lobby under Bush. There was also lots of people who wanted to attack Iran under Bush because they claimed that there was an imminent nuclear threat. Bush never went along with that. Cheney, I think, advocated for it within the administration, if memory serves, but that never happened. Bush would never have declared himself the ruler of Gaza, really, the ruler of Venezuela, taken over Greenland. That would not have been in Bush's repertoire. So Trump's got his own distinct ideological features. Yes, that stems in part from his personality, his temperament, his fixation on resource extraction, because like he denounced Bush for not taking the oil in Iraq. It wasn't so much invading Iraq, although he said that was probably a bad idea. It was that once you invaded, you should take the oil, and Bush wouldn't do it.
So you think he's more hawkish than Bush?
It's a spectrum. It's like a multidimensional spectrum almost. I think in certain ways, Trump is more cavalier about the exertion of American coercive force abroad. Like, I have a hard time thinking of Bush coming up with the idea to just start bombing random boats in the Caribbean Sea for a couple of months as he amasses the biggest naval armada in the history of South America off the coast of Venezuela. Like, that's probably not something that Bush would have come up with. It doesn't necessarily mean that Bush wasn't, quote, hawkish, right? It just means that there are different strains of, quote, hawkish American power projection, some of which are distinct to Trump, some of which are distinct to Bush. Like, we don't have to be constantly stuck in this frame where we're always comparing and contrasting stuff to, quote, neocons circa 2003. I mean, it's been over 2 decades, right? So let's update our priors as to how we're understanding the spectrum of American foreign policy views and the ideologies that exist within it, especially given that Trump has been the paramount American political figure for the past 11 years, so that he's going to remake things in his image to some extent. Neocon becomes just this buzzword that people can throw out to kind of like counterpose Trump with or counterpose MAGA with, even when it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, all the actual neocons, like a Lindsey Graham, they just updated their branding or rebranded themselves and fully ingratiated into the Trump orbit. Like when Trump was out of office in 2022, I went to the opening sort of conference of the America First Policy Institute, which is basically the think tank waiting to become the second Trump administration. Right? While he was out of office, it was run by Howard Lutnick, who then became the transition chairman, and then the Commerce Secretary, and Linda McMahon, who was the small business administrator in the first term and is now the education secretary, right? And so they were incubating the personnel and the staff for the next Trump administration, and that's where people like Mike Waltz, guys like Mike Waltz, would go and say, "We got to win in Ukraine. We actually have to send American forces in some form to help Ukraine fire missiles correctly into Russia." I mean, I interviewed him at the time. Like Joni Ernst would go and make the most bellicose statements you could imagine. Lindsey Graham, I think, was there as well. Pompeo, Newt Gingrich, etc. Like, all was welcome under the MAGA umbrella or the America First umbrella. And so that became the prevailing Republican Party branding in the Trump era, right? So in light of that, you got to be a little bit more discriminating in terms of what we're calling hawkish or not, if our reference point for what is hawkish is still stuck in the George W. Bush era.
Okay, what about
Because-
forever wars, right? Trump has explicitly said, I oppose forever wars. Could that
What
be
does that mean? Barack Obama said that. Joe Biden said that. Joe Biden actually ended one of the quote unquote forever wars, Afghanistan, and for his efforts had denunciation after denunciation flying his way from the Republicans and Trump himself for withdrawing from Afghanistan. Now they'll say, oh, it was just the manner in which they executed the withdrawal.
Right,
That was always a fallacy, because the idea that you were ever going to do a totally seamless withdrawal of a long-term U.S. military occupation in South Asia, or Central Asia rather, that was absurd. But so the Republicans basically came out and opposed the withdrawal almost on principle, even if they would claim that it was about the execution. But then Trump, sure enough, revised his entire purported view on Afghanistan and started saying in 2024 that he was never going to withdraw at all from Afghanistan, even though he and Pompeo had nominally brokered what was called the Doha Agreement with the Taliban to withdraw all U.S. troops from all U.S. bases in Afghanistan after X number of years or X number of conditions were met. Well, lo and behold, we learned from Pompeo and Trump that the conditions were never going to be met by design, right? So they were going to keep a permanent occupation force in Afghanistan. They claim it was so they could have a base that was somehow proximate to China and Chinese nuclear facilities or something. But forever wars, that's the number one forever war, right? That was 20-something years. Right? Nearly 20 years. And Trump saying he was not in favor of ending that. In fact, he agreed with Liz Cheney that there should have been no withdrawal. So, but even in the abstract, forever wars, nobody would come out and affirmatively support that. It doesn't mean anything, right? What does that mean? That you think in hindsight, maybe it wasn't a great idea to invade Iraq? Okay. I mean, if people think that that's now some really brilliant political insight, then I think the bar is pretty low. And also, I don't know, could a war be objectionable without being, quote, forever? Perhaps, like if you have an objection to what's going on with Iran now, it hasn't yet gone on for forever. And also, when Bush invaded Iraq, which, by the way, Trump was still basically just a celebrity pundit at the time, he kind of sort of supported it when he talked to Howard Stern like a few months prior. And then by 2004, yeah, he was ahead of the curve among Republicans and came out in opposition to it, essentially. But in 2003, when, March 19th, 2003, Bush announces the Operation Iraqi Freedom, he didn't say, oh, hey, everybody, this is a forever war. Like, get on board. It should be awesome to have a forever war. That's not how these things are framed. Maybe this Iran thing does become a forever war. Trump says that his intention is to personally control the Strait of Hormuz. Explain to me how that's going to be effectuated without a continuous military presence of some kind. He says that he's going to determine who the next political leadership is of Iran after he killed the supreme leader and after he and Israel have killed all these top Iranian officials. He says he's going to do just like he's been doing, just like he declared for Venezuela, and he's going to have ultimate veto power over who the political leadership is in Iran. Is that going to not entail some U.S. military presence for maybe longer than people might assume? If he's going to take the oil, as he says he's going to do, like I said the minute he launched this thing on February 28th, what you think Trump is just going to do an about face and no longer be interested in taking the oil once he's done with Iran? But he's come out and explicitly said it that he plans on, as to the victor goes the spoils. He's going to be, quote, taking the oil somehow in Iran. How is that going to be effectuated? You don't think there's going to need to be some sort of U.S. military facilitation of that? So for all we know, this could be a forever war, even though they keep saying, oh, just wait another 2 or 3 weeks. Like every 2 weeks, they say, give it another 2 or 3 weeks. So of course it's never going to be branded as a forever war. That's something that's a label that gets applied years in hindsight to a war that has become unpopular.
So you don't think Trump in any scenario or situation or as part of his overwhelming philosophy is anti-intervention or skeptical of intervention in any way? Are there no examples of that?
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I mean, in 2016, you can go find a column or several things that I wrote, but I remember one column in particular in the New York Daily News where I sort of sketch out how, based on the instincts that he's exhibited, because remember, in 2016, Trump was a novelty candidate. He had no governing record. He was the first candidate since Wendell Willkie, I believe, in 1940, to become a major party nominee without a record in government or a record in the military. So all we had to go on as of 2016 was this sort of like rolling punditry thing that he did. And he was a reality TV show host. He was a beauty pageant proprietor. We couldn't use the same like heuristics to analyze his political worldview as we would for a Hillary Clinton, right, who was Secretary of State, United States Senator, etc. And I wrote in this column that, look, I mean, Trump has some discernible instincts that suggest he goes a bit against the prevailing consensus in the Republican Party and perhaps even to some extent in the Democratic Party as to military interventionism. And when you contrast that with Hillary Clinton, the contrast is actually pretty salient because Hillary Clinton in 2016 was calling for a no-fly zone to be imposed in Syria. Trump said no. Now, so those were some forward-looking projections that I made as to what Trump could potentially do once he's in office. But by 2024, right, I'm refusing to stay stuck in quicksand in 2016 with the mountains of data that we gathered since then.
So you don't think he's shown restraint in any scenario?
Like which scenario?
Well, yeah, I'm asking. Is there any scenario in your view? You think he's been hawkish on everything?
I mean, he's carried forth basically the status quo of the Biden administration when it comes to Ukraine. And he's actually loosened some of the restrictions on Ukraine for long-range missile strikes into Russian territory. He's come up with a way to circumvent Congress so they don't have to make these big politically sensitive appropriations anymore to keep arming Ukraine in perpetuity. He got Elon Musk somehow recently, or maybe Elon did it independently, I'm not sure, but to basically give Ukraine a leg up against Russia by allowing them to access Starlink, and it was cut off for Russia or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. So in February of 2026, Ukraine actually had the first net gains in terms of territory in the war that they had since 2023 under Trump. I don't know. He's calling for record-busting military budgets, $1.5 trillion in just the yearly annual appropriation for the Pentagon. On top of that, another $175 billion from the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, his signature domestic legislation from summer of last year. And now the Pentagon's putting out an extra on top of all that, $200 billion supplemental for military spending. So I don't know. Does that suggest to you some conflict between Trump and the so-called military industrial complex? Don Jr. is running some kind of like drone acquisition company now that's like in bed with Pentagon contractors. Where has he shown restraint? Did he show restraint?
Which is funny, by the way, just like one thing, which I recognize your point that this is all just, very savvy political campaigning. But in I think right after Trump got elected, putting aside your feelings on some of these people, but like Dave Smith tweeted out something about we need more anti-war people in this administration, and Don Jr. quote tweeted and was like, hell yeah, something to that effect, like, yeah, like we're gonna have anti-war people in, but now Don Jr.
we're gonna swap out Pompeo and Haley for Rubio and Stefanik. That's what happened.
Yeah.
But like, tell me where he's shown restraint. I mean, there are instances. I'm not saying Obama showed perfect restraint by any means. Yeah. Or there isn't plenty to criticize in terms of his foreign policy record. But Obama, when there was a big clamor, yes, in part from the quote Israel lobby in 2013, for him to bomb Assad in Syria as retribution for an alleged chemical weapons attack, Obama said, "Look, I believe that we probably should go forward with this and bomb Assad, but I'm going to put this to Congress." Meaning I want congressional approval before we actually go and take military action against Syria. Congress does not approve it, and Obama aborts the mission, and they come up with a diplomatic resolution in terms of, with Russia actually, in terms of transferring over some of these chemical weapons stockpiles, something roughly like that. I'm not going to have all the full details at the top of my mind. I don't know. that could be said to show restraint. But Trump, when he gets in 2017, he doesn't bother going to Congress. Are you kidding? They haven't even made a pretense of trying to argue that this current war is legally authorized at all with Iran. But in April 2017, he bombs Assad without thinking twice when a similar episode happens in terms of a purported chemical weapons attack. So who showed restraint there, Obama or Trump? And then the April 2018, Trump does it all over again with Assad. Did he show restraint when he tried to do regime change in Venezuela in January of 2019? Because he just did it in a more muscular way in the second term. So where's the restraint? The one exception has always been the North Korea negotiations. Because if you remember, in the first year and a half or so of the first Trump administration, Trump was doing maximalist rhetoric. Like he was saying, look out for fire and fury, meaning it was actually sort of a nuclear crisis that he was fomenting. It didn't get to that point, although Hickseth was on TV on Fox saying, yeah, just go forward with it, bomb North Korea. But then he does this, fairly unique personal diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, where he goes to Hanoi and he even does the ceremonial step over the border from South Korea to North Korea. He's pretty amazing photo ops of Trump and Kim Jong-un, which you never would have thought would happen. So I was sort of on principle in favor of that, just in terms of the direct personal diplomacy. But then it was conjoined with maximalist policy demands that were never going to be resolvable by an actual negotiation. And then the negotiations or the diplomatic contacts with North Korea fell apart. Nothing ever came of it, right? Because they were demanding total denuclearization of North Korea, basically national humiliation and capitulation, just like what they were demanding with Iran. And then, Kurt says, oh, look, but they came in, this was not a foregone conclusion. It could have gone either way. Witkoff, his boy, comes out and says the only acceptable resolution for us over the course of these alleged negotiations was a very similar kind of national capitulation and humiliation, where Iran would have to accede to total abolition of any nuclear enrichment and effectively destroying their own nuclear facilities. That's what Trump was saying that they wanted in tandem with Israel. So it was a pantomime of negotiations to set the groundwork for the eventual military action, which Trump very nicely previewed for us when he was running and saying, look, they tried to assassinate me. I want to blow them to smithereens. He didn't seem like he was kidding when he said that. Oftentimes he does seem like he's kidding or sarcastic. That was a written statement that he came out and read. He wasn't just spitballing. Okay. So I don't know. Give me an area where he's shown some measure of restraint. I just don't see it. They tore up the arms control treaties in the first term with Russia, right? So the INF treaty, the Intermediate Missile Range Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, and there was one more that I think I'm forgetting. But the INF treaty was the most salient, most consequential one. And so Biden comes in. And Trump and Pompeo are, as he's leaving office in late 2020, early 2021, saying, look, we're not sure if we even want to renew the New START treaty. This is basically just the continuation of the longstanding bilateral nuclear arms control regimen that had been ongoing between the United States and the Soviet Union and later the Russian Federation since the early 70s. Trump was threatening to just withdraw from that as he's leaving office in the first term. But then he loses. I mean, he'll never admit that he lost, but he did lose the 2020 election. He left office. Biden comes in. One of the first things he does is re-up the New START treaty that Trump was threatening to withdraw from. But it's only for a couple years, right? So the expiration date for that New START treaty renewal was I think it was February 4th of this year. Trump let it expire. There was no longer any nuclear arms control regimen bilaterally between the United States and Russia for the first time since Richard Nixon was president. So give me an area where he's exercised this restraint. I just don't see it. People want to say, oh, he exercised restraint because he manufactured a phony crisis in June of 2019 where he was going to bomb Iran because of a ticky-tack incident where an unmanned aerial drone of the United States was allegedly shot down over the Persian Gulf, not over the Gulf of Mexico, or the Gulf of America, not over the San Francisco Bay or the Hudson River, the Persian Gulf. Trump says, oh, I'm 10 minutes away from bombing Iran over that. and then he holds back at the last second, decides not to do it, and then he gets credit for restraint. For why was he even in that position to begin with?
Yeah.
So I mean, you got to give me an example at some point.
Yeah.
Because I'm just not really seeing it. I mean, look, is it possible that if you had a really hardcore like resistance Democrat in office right now who had been radicalized about Russia, going back to Russiagate, and about how freedom was on the line in Ukraine, that maybe they would be maybe expending more of their energies on the Ukraine and like maybe going a bit further in terms of trying to do like there was basically in the early stages of the Ukraine war, 2022 to roughly 2023, there was basically a policy consensus that was sort of haphazardly coalescing toward the imposition of some kind of regime change in Russia. Okay, they even had conferences in D.C. that like members of Congress would attend about dismembering the Russian Federation. I don't think that's really quite what Trump is interested in, although it should be said that he brags that he threatened to bomb Putin's personal living quarters in his first term.
Oh, really?
Have you heard about that? I mean,
no.
Interesting what stuff gets emphasized and what stuff doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So, it's, in other words, it's possible that there could be something more belligerent going on right now vis-a-vis Ukraine under a Democrat than there is right now under Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And the Republicans, but pretty much it's the policy status quo. And in fact, he's gone further than Biden did with these long-range missile strikes and intelligence sharing for bombing missions into the Russian Federation. So I don't know, but look, I mean, it's not everything is black or white. There could be a particular instance where he does exercise some more restraint than maybe others would have liked to see or had been advocating. North Korea in the first term is definitely the top example of that I've long cited. But I don't see something akin to North Korea, that North Korea exception happening in the second term. Do you? And if you do think that there's an area where he's exercised restraint, explain it to me, and then we can discuss it. But I'm just not seeing it on the menu right now.
Yeah. I'm out of my...
Is he exercising restraint by saying he wants to seize Greenland, wants to take over Cuba,
right.
wants to seize the oil of Venezuela, etc.?
You are making a highly persuasive factual case, but I'm also out of my expertise here in this area. But I feel like we've really exhausted this, and I really appreciate your insights into this.
I can go all night, as you could probably tell.
I would love to pair you up in some more debates on this because I'm learning a lot from you. I learned a lot from Kurt.
Let's go. I will show you the zero hedge debate that I agreed to do in September, I think it was, or October of 2024, when they paired me with this guy from InfoWars, which I wasn't really thrilled about debating because I like to remain anchored in some degree of reality, but I did it anyway. No, it was like one of his minions, Harrison Smith.
Owen Schroyer? Oh, I don't know.
Harrison Smith, one of his minions.
Okay.
And his point was that Trump is going to storm into office and put a stop to the Greater Israel Project. He's actually secretly anti-Israel. That was his point. And that's why you should vote for Trump.
Okay. Interesting.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Can we get an update on that?
Yeah. Can you just very quickly, I know you love giving long explanations, which I love, but I do want to wrap this up quickly.
I'll keep it short.
Kurt said 50-50. I did want to get, if obviously this, you can't really quantify this, but I'm assuming you're more like 80-20 of like this is 80% Trump's doing, maybe 10-20%. Is that sort of your thinking on this?
So I mean, like Trump versus Israel, who's doing is it that the war in Iran is going on? Look, I mean, the United States is still the reigning superpower in the world, the most powerful military, the biggest economy, etc. The United States president is the most powerful figure on earth, for better or worse. So that's where the power dynamic starts with me. Even if, as an adjunct to that projection of American hegemonic power, you have Israel in the Middle East, which is like a mini America, or that's how people characterize it when they want to say that Israel and the United States have these integrated interests. And Trump subscribes to that belief. So, no, I just don't think.
You think it's marginal?
It doesn't happen without the agency of Trump. Okay, you can have Israel advocating for something.
Kurt would agree.
Yeah, okay, but Trump, I'm sorry, but Obama somehow managed to thwart the Israel lobby in doing the JCPOA in the second term, or the Iran nuclear deal that was Netanyahu himself and the Israeli political class and all the lobbying groups bitterly opposed it to the point that, and I know I'm going on longer than I promised I would. I'll wrap up.
Sure.
To the point where Netanyahu was invited by the congressional Republicans to give a speech, deliver an address to a joint session of Congress, inveighing against the sitting president's signature foreign policy initiative. Okay, but it got through anyway because Obama actually exerted the political will necessary to get his initiative enacted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I sort of blanch at this idea that the Israel lobby is always insurmountable and it has this like mythical influence that like everything just, they're Netanyahu is like, playing chess on the chessboard and like Trump is one of the pieces and he's like moving Trump along. Okay, so if I had to just buy into the premise and quantify it, I would say I'll go 90-10. 90 Trump, 10 Israel. How's that?
Yeah. No, that's what I inferred from what you said.
Although I will be pedantic and kind of reject that it could be quantified in that way. But if I'm forced to, I'm going to go 90-10.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course. Okay, there's more we can still talk about here, but I feel like we got to wrap.
Explain to me. Hold on a second. If it was, let's say it was 100% Israel, 0% Trump, how would that have worked? Like, what would Netanyahu he would hypnotize the U.S. military and deploy them himself? It doesn't even make sense.
That wouldn't have worked. Yeah. No, that's a fair point.
All right. Thanks for.
I feel like we can talk more about this, and
sure.
I would like to at some point. I'll let you know.
It seems like the Iran situation might be going on for a bit longer, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of time for debates.
One interesting idea actually I had, which I guess I can just float by you on air here. There's been all these divisions within MAGA land, and one of the ones has been Ben Shapiro on one side. And then all, Tucker, Candace, Megyn Kelly, Dave Smith on the other side. I wonder,
it's a soap opera.
I wonder, given that Ben had you on, because you guys seem to agree on Epstein and you guys had a friendly exchange there. I wonder if Ben might be inclined to debate you on Iran, given that there's a level of mutual respect there. And I assume
I'm not a guy who says, my views on Epstein have to be dictated by my pre-existing views on Israel. I'm just going to graft my Israel critical views onto Epstein arbitrarily. Right. And then, therefore, because I'm not an Epstein maximalist, that must mean that I'm pro-Iran war. I mean, this doesn't even make any sense if you think about it for 2 seconds.
But I assume you think that Ben is like.
I haven't followed the commentary on the Iran war. Lately, I'm sure I know what his position is.
Yeah, you're less hawkish than Ben, right? He's more sort of.
I've never been in favor of any war, ever, literally.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So there would be tremendous amount of daylight between you and Ben. Very likely.
I would assume so.
On the Iran war, and you'd be open to a debate on that?
Sure.
Yeah, because I feel like Ben, he sees. Well, I mean, according to Ben, he's a
hardcore pro-Israel. I mean, that's always been sort of like the nexus of my disagreement with him going back years.
Yeah. But yeah, Ben.
But my point, I would actually praise him because he supported Trump ardently as well. And I think he actually did so for rational reasons, meaning that he saw Trump as a vehicle through which his preferred policies would get enacted. Whereas you have this other crowd of like a Dave Smith or whomever who confabulated this alternate universe understanding of Trump, who, as though he was going to be a vehicle for what they like. You can't have both. It's either Ben Shapiro or the Dave Smith Tucker crowd, right? And it was very manifestly always Ben Shapiro if you had to pick one in terms of the likelihood and the evidence, right? Yeah. So I would commend Ben Shapiro at least for some consistency in that sense.
Yeah, although you could, this is kind of I don't even know how to articulate this, but you could make a case for, okay, he's at least appealing to anti-war sentiments very strongly while also being hawkish, and maybe if we support him and he does these big podcasts and we're all anti-war,
you can always come up with some convoluted rationalization.
We can hold him accountable, and we can appeal to that side. We can be a moderating force.
It was so stupid though, because like if that's your logic, right? You're almost better off supporting, and you're most concerned about Israel in the Middle East. You're better off with the Democratic coalition at this point. The Democratic coalition, is not dominated by end times apocalyptic Christian believers who think that Jesus is going to come and rule over the earth from Jerusalem.
Fair, but they didn't appeal at all to the anti-war independent podcast
What do
group.
you mean they didn't appeal? So I mean,
Kamala didn't appeal to that
I'm
at
saying
all.
if you have a rational, I'm not saying who appealed or didn't. The Kamala campaign was terrible. I said that at the time.
Yeah.
I'm saying if what you're saying is, oh, I'm going to support a candidate and then try to influence them, or I'm trying to steer them toward my preferred ends, and you're concerned mostly about Israel, meaning, or trying to have like a less interventionist or a pro-war take on what the proper relationship between the U.S. and Israel should be, you're better off doing that from within the Democratic Party coalition.
But again, there was at least
why Netanyahu's always been supportive of Republicans. He opposed Obama, and he supported Romney. He supported Trump,
right,
etc.
But at least there was something to work with Trump in some of his anti-war sloganeering. Whereas Kamala didn't do. Well, again, you're acknowledging Trump did say some a lot of anti-war things.
Trump,
you're saying that
Kamala said some sort of meaningless cliches around not liking the war in Gaza as well. The podcast bros just never talked about him, right? Because they were audience captured, willfully. They liked it. It was commercially very lucrative for them to be on this Trump train thing. And so why would they wouldn't give any credence to the idea that you can work with Kamala, right? So it doesn't make any sense on their own terms.
But I think Trump said far more anti-war things than Kamala did.
I disagree.
Appealed to that base.
Did Kamala ever go out and give a pre-prepared speech threatening that, number one, she's concluded that Iran is trying to assassinate her and therefore the entire country can be blown to smithereens? Because Trump did that, and sure enough, he is now blowing Iran to smithereens.
And when was that again?
That was September of 2024.
Right before the election. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember Dave Smith commenting on that, or Tucker, or all these other people, or even Kirk.
Okay, that's fair. But did Kamala do anything like what Trump did in Michigan? That campaigning that we just
yeah, she did stuff. I mean, look, the Democratic Party, the Democratic nomination that in 2024 was a shambles, right?
Yeah.
So they did stuff where like they wouldn't even allow a Palestinian to speak at the convention. I covered that at the convention. But yeah, I mean, they tried. I don't have a specific example, but I'm almost positive I could find examples if I Googled for 30 seconds right now of Kamala and her surrogates kind of like doing these sort of placating things with Muslim or Arab constituencies. Sure.
Right, but again, we like the fact that you would have that you're almost certain, whereas we're definitely certain that Trump did that. Like it suggests that Trump did campaign more on anti-war than Kamala did.
I just disagree.
You don't think Trump campaigned more on anti-war than Kamala?
I think he had much more effective propagandists that created that impression for people, including yourself, it seems, such as Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. and Tucker and Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and JD Vance, etc.
But you don't think Trump himself?
They got together to create that impression, which was politically clever.
Okay,
but on the substance, on the merits, no.
I understand. I understand your point on that. And we're not even talking about policy right now. We're just talking about campaigning. If you were to compare anti-war statements from Kamala versus Trump in the 2024 campaign trail, my guess is that Trump would likely have far more anti-war statements than Kamala. Obviously, we don't have an answer to that right now.
I mean, some of that was just a function of Kamala being in the incumbent administration. So what's she going to make anti-war statements about the Biden-Harris foreign policy record? She's going to denounce her own record. Probably not. Just like, Trump ran 3 times for president. People always forget 2020. Did Trump go around making anti-war statements in 2020 when he was in power, along with Mike Pence? I don't really recall many. Every now and then he'll say something like, oh, we're against the military-industrial complex or something, which is like a total joke. I mean, they're in an absolute bonanza whenever he's in office.
Yeah.
But no, I just don't think, I think a lot of that was a confected narrative. Again, politically brilliant. Look, he won the election.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was very effective, appealing to a certain demographic of like anti-establishment podcast listening guys. Really? Yeah. That's a big constituency.
Yeah. Yeah. They
got the same impression oftentimes that you're describing. And why did they get it? Because of this surrogate movement of, Tucker, Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. spewing nonsense that, I do think there needs to be still some kind of accounting for. Just like I thought the same in 2016 when there was also a seismic media failure, although it was more concentrated in the quote-unquote mainstream media. But by 2024, we have an ascendant alternative media or independent media, or how you define the ecosystem, who are even worse in a lot of ways, amazingly enough, than the traditional media in terms of the false information, false political information they were transmitting out to the public and profiting from.
Yeah.
I mean, we're at war with Iran right now. Hello?
Yeah.
Am I crazy?
I understand what you're saying, although there is, I think you would acknowledge, there's at least credit we can give to the podcast guys for holding him accountable and being like, hey, we oppose this. What the hell? I've Dave Smith, Tucker, Rogan, they've very strongly, I know you have different feelings about Tucker, but like Rogan and Dave Smith have very strongly.
Joe Rogan had Donald Trump on basically the eve of the presidential election in his studio for 3 hours. He could have asked him about Iran. Actually, Trump brought up Iran on his own accord and said, look, things are dangerous for a president, meaning alluding to him potentially being assassinated by Iran. Joe Rogan didn't ask any follow-up questions on that. Oh, I know he's not a journalist. He's just a comedian, bro. Okay. Well, if you're now this Johnny Carson figure where you're getting presidential candidates on the eve of the general election to make pilgrimages to you and, jockey for your endorsement, I don't know, maybe you should up your game a little bit, but it was an ass-kiss fest. Because Joe Rogan says, oh, we've been betrayed. MAGA's been betrayed. Because he's clueless. Did he know about the bomb the smithereens clip or about endorsing joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on nuclear facilities? Did he know anything about the first-term record? Did he know about the personnel? All the stuff I've been talking about ad nauseum on this podcast. Probably not. So no, I don't give Joe Rogan credit. I give Joe Rogan, I find him foolish.
But
for contributing to the propagandistic misconceptions that now have led some people to believe that they've been betrayed by something that could not have been more eminently foreseeable and telegraphed. I wrote a whole thing last June. After Trump bombed Iran the first time, Trump bombs Iran, this possibly the most telegraphed event in human history, and I go through mountains of information demonstrating that. Okay. So no, Dave Smith doesn't get credit.
No, but they're all
Dave Smith. First of all, I'm not crediting Dave Smith for anything anymore.
But they're
criticizing. It's a little bit of a personal vendetta because
they're criticizing
podcast, which
right
it's supposed to be some comedy podcast. But amazingly, I don't think I've ever heard him say a single thing that's funny. Comic Dave Smith. But he says it would be justifiable for me to be murdered because he doesn't like my views on the Jeffrey Epstein story. So no, I'm not going to credit Dave Smith because I think that actually is an
I'm sure he was joking.
He was not joking. He was dead serious.
He was not joking?
Nope. He was dead serious. And he continues to reaffirm that.
He was dead serious that you should be killed for your Epstein coverage?
He was dead serious that he couched it and saying, look, I'm not actively calling for anyone to go murder Michael Tracy. However, he says, it's totally justifiable and even good and welcome and right for people to have the reaction to what his position is on Epstein that they would want to go murder him. That's what he said. That's your podcast intellectual, Dave Smith.
Where can I find that clip?
I posted the clip. It was probably like in mid-February.
Okay. Which was that on his show? Because I want to go.
It was on whatever dopey show he's got. Some podcast.
Okay, because I would like to find that and review that for myself before
go ahead.
Commenting.
I mean, you think I'm mischaracterizing it?
I just want to see what
what he said there. Go search for me. Put my username on X and just go Comic Dave Smith. It's like from February. I don't know, 19th or something.
Listen, he's a good friend of mine. I like him. So
he's a piece of shit.
If what you're saying is right, I will send this to him and I'll ask him. I'll be like, hey, what the hell's going on here?
He's a piece of shit.
But if I feel like he's joking, then I'll come back to you. But
he wasn't joking.
If he was serious, I will ask him about it.
And then on X a couple of times because I posted the clip, and he doubled down on it pretty much.
Okay, I will watch the clip, and then I will.
I mean, he's going to try to say, "Oh, I wasn't calling for anyone." What he says was, "I wasn't calling for you to be murdered. You're lying." I'm saying, I know that you couched it by saying, "Look, I'm not actively calling for anyone to murder you. I'm just saying it would be defensible for somebody to think that they ought to murder you based on your political views on the Jeffrey Epstein story that I don't like." That's what he said. So he's a piece of shit. He's not funny.
All right.
I mean, comic Dave Smith. I mean, have you ever laughed at a single thing he's ever said? Seriously, be honest.
I've only really seen his political commentary, not his.
Right. So the answer is no.
comedy-
Even though he's supposed to, he's supposed to be a comedian.
He has one on YouTube that I
Like
I
Tim
follow.
Dillon does political commentary as well, but he's actually funny. Dave Smith, I don't know what he is, and he's just like this. We have this scourge of failed like not unfunny comedians who then transition to like political prognosticators.
To be fair, you probably also haven't seen one of his specials either, because he does political commentary.
I tried to watch some of it actually with Richard Hanania, with Donald Lark, and it wasn't funny.
Okay. Well, listen, I think we've fully exhausted this. I do.
Okay.
I do have some more points on your criticism of Rogan and the podcast stuff, but
we'll get another time. We'll go into it.
Yeah. I feel like we fully.
When is this going to be posted?
Exhausted. Because I debated Senator Ron Johnson today about the Iran war, and that's.
Did you debate him or interview him?
Both critically interview and ask very tough questions, and I think I did a good job.
I'll take a look at it.
That will.
How'd you arrange that? Just ask him.
Yeah.
Good job.
He did some good work.
I've interviewed him a few times.
Yeah, he did some good work revealing he examined some recent Biden era COVID documents about them downplaying vaccine side effects. So I reached out about that. And then his team said yes to that. And then I said, and they asked, do you want to ask about anything else? And then I said, yeah, Iran war. And they said, sure. So I'm
all
sure
right.
the COVID thing.
Whenever it comes out, just let me know.
In any case, the Ron Johnson debate will be out Friday, April 3rd. And then I think because that's tied to the news, we didn't really talk about anything tied to the news today. So we talked more about.
The Iran war is not tied to the news?
No, but like what's happened in the last 12 hours. Whereas with Ron Johnson, we did. So this will be out probably Monday, Tuesday next week.
Okay.
And we'll talk more about podcast stuff that you went into in the last few minutes there that I won't get a chance to respond to now because it's been a while here. This is my second podcast.
Okay. Yeah, this is a long day for you.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, I spent the early part of the day at a Epstein settlement hearing for.
Okay.
Now we won't get into it. All right.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Talk to you later.